From blood slides glittering in the light of Dexter's lab, to Doak's snarling, surprise motherf in that cabin. From Lila's fire chewing through the evidence Dexter thought he'd controlled to Lundy's investigation tightening around the Bay Harbor butcher. From Deb walking into the church at the exact second Dexter's knife hits Travis, to LaGuardia standing in that shipping container, with the entire case finally adding up. Again and again, his plan looks airtight, right up until it collapses. These are not anomalies in Dexter's trajectory. They are the pattern. Every season, the same loop plays out: design the ritual, follow the code, stay 10 steps ahead, and then watch as one tiny variable, one overlooked witness, one human emotion knocks the whole thing over. The fantasy is control. The reality is inevitability. So let's kick things off with the paradox at the heart of that fantasy. In this video, we're going to argue that the only reason Dexter ever believed he could control his darkness is because Harry was convinced he never truly could. Harry doesn't build the code as a cure. He builds it as a containment system, a set of procedural sandbags stacked against a flood he's already decided cannot be stopped. The focus is not just on what Dexter does with that code, but on why Harry writes it in the first place. And that brings us to the central question. How does a veteran Miami cop look at a quiet, polite little boy and decide, with chilling certainty, that he is destined to become a killer? Most parents worry their kid might get into trouble. Harry worries his kid will leave bodies. That's not a leap you make off one bad day. That's a conclusion you crawl toward, one red flag at a time. To keep this clear, each major section will peel back a different layer of that decision. We'll go back to Harry finding toddler Dexter in that shipping container, surrounded by blood, and track the investigation he starts in his own house. We'll examine the flat affect, the fascination with crime scenes, the animal cruelty Harry literally digs up in the graveyard. We'll look at the moment he chooses to train instead of treat, to weaponize instead of institutionalize, and the psychological consequences when Dexter eventually realizes he wasn't saved, he was groomed. Along the way, we'll see that Harry's prediction is not a single cinematic epiphany. It's a slow accumulation of evidence, a private case file that convinces him that if Dexter doesn't learn to kill by a code, he will kill without one. But there's one more twist. Harry's certainty about Dexter's future doesn't just come from what Dexter does. It comes from what Harry fails to do the night he opens that shipping container and leaves something or someone behind. That omission will haunt every rule he writes next. Harry opens that container as a cop. He walks out of it as something else entirely. Let's reconstruct that night from his side. Because to keep this clear, the focus is not just on what happened to Dexter, but on what that scene did to Harry's mind. The door groans open. The stench hits first, stale salt air, diesel, and blood that's gone from bright red to rust black. Flashlights slice through the dark. Bodies, plastic, saw marks. And then, in the middle of that massacre, a toddler sitting in a sticky puddle of his mother's blood, staring at nothing. Dexter is not crying. That's the detail. That's the crack in Harry's plan to treat this as just another crime scene. The boy is soaked, literally marinated in blood, skin wrinkled from days in that liquid, clothes stiff, tiny hands painted in a substance no child should ever have to touch. Beside him, a silent baby, Brian, barely moving, eyes unfocused, already being left behind in Harry's field of vision, even as paramedics rush in. From a procedural standpoint, Harry knows the checklist. Secure the perimeter. Call it in. Preserve evidence. But as a homicide cop, his mental library is already full of origin stories that started in rooms just like this. Abused kids who grew into abusers. neglected kids who graduated to arson, assault, homicide. He's walked through too many houses where a broken child was the first clue in a future investigation. So when he looks at Dexter, he doesn't just see a victim. He sees a brain being rewired in real time. A child whose first stable memory will be the sound of a chainsaw and the smell of coagulating blood. The central question for Harry isn't will this matter? It's how could this not deform him? And then the guilt hits. Laura was his informant, his responsibility, his failure. He arrived too late to stop the slaughter, and now the consequences are staring back at him with that blank, uncomprehending stare. This isn't abstract psychology. This is a living indictment he has to lift out of the carnage and carry past the cameras. Along the way, something in Harry's role quietly shifts. He's still the rescuer, but he's already thinking like a future handler. If this kid breaks bad in 15 years, whose fault will that be? What will the investigation say? That the decorated cop took a blood-soaked toddler home and never saw this coming? That's why, later, Harry can't stop probing Dexter's inner life. The constant questions, the therapy sessions, the watchful eyes at every minor incident with dead animals or flat effect at funerals. He isn't just a worried father. He's a detective waiting for evidence to confirm a hypothesis he formed in that container. This child has been primed for violence. In this video, we're going to track how that single night becomes Harry's private case file, the justification for the code, and the excuse for every boundary he crosses. Because when he carries Dexter out of that shipping container, Harry believes he's saving him. The real question is whether he also knows, on some level, that he's taking home a ticking bomb, and is already planning how to aim it. Harry doesn't bring home a monster. He brings home a mystery. A toddler soaked in blood grows into a quiet boy in a clean suburban bedroom. And instead of exploding from that trauma, Dexter does something that unsettles Harry even more. He barely reacts at all. We jump ahead to those early years in the Morgan house. New bed, new toys, new routines. On paper, this is the part of the story where a rescued child begins to heal. In Harry's mind, as a cop and a father, the plan is simple. Safety, stability. And time should pull Dexter back from whatever that shipping container did to his psychology. So, Harry waits for the usual signs. Nightmares that send Dexter running down the hall, sudden crying fits, clinging to Doris at the sight of red meat or a scraped knee, fear of blood, or at least visible distress when anything even hints at that original scene. Those signs never come. Instead, we get young Dexter sitting at the breakfast table, perfectly polite, perfectly functional, perfectly hollow. He's calm when other kids would be inconsolable, detached when other kids would be furious. He talks about school, follows rules, keeps his room neat, as if the horror never happened or didn't register the way it should. The focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on what he doesn't do. No tantrums, no questions, no spontaneous moments of grief. For Harry, that silence is louder than any breakdown. In his experience, victims either break down or act out. They don't usually go emotionally silent in a way that feels less like healing and more like something has been switched off. To keep this clear, Harry isn't seeing resilience. He's seeing absence. It's the emotional equivalent of a crime scene with no evidence, not a sign of safety, but a sign that something has been carefully removed. So he starts testing. Gentle questions at bedtime about nightmares. Casual probes in the car about whether Dexter ever thinks about before. He brings up blood in conversation, mentions the word scared, waits for a flinch. Again and again, he runs into the same wall, confusion and emptiness. Dexter isn't refusing to talk, He genuinely doesn't seem to understand what Harry is trying to reach. Along the way, that pattern hardens into a conclusion. When Harry later tells Dexter, "You don't feel things the way other people do," that line doesn't come out of nowhere. It's the verdict from years of quiet observation, from a long private investigation where every expected emotion fails to appear. The central question shifts from will this kid recover to what grows in the space where those feelings should be. And when the emotions don't show up on Dexter's face, they start showing up somewhere else, in his behavior, in the hobbies he chooses, in the things he does when no one is looking, which is where Harry finally sees what that calm exterior has been hiding. So when Harry finally sees what Dexter does, when he thinks no one is watching, it isn't a tantrum. It's a procedure. We're in a quiet backyard, late afternoon. Sprinklers ticking in some other yard, traffic humming in the distance, and in the middle of that ordinary suburban soundscape, Harry walks out and finds his young son crouched over a whimpering animal, a stray cat pinned in place, rope, a box of knives that should have been in the kitchen, blood already on Dexter's hands. This is not horseplay gone wrong. This is not a kid who squeezed too hard and panicked. Dexter has laid everything out with the same calm we'll later see in his plastic-wrapped kill rooms. Tools arranged, body positioned, eyes steady. He isn't startled when Harry calls his name. He's interrupted, like a scientist pulled away from an experiment. To keep this clear, the shift here is not in what Dexter is touching, but in how he is experiencing it. Most children, confronted with an animal in pain, either recoil, cry, or rush to fix it. Dexter does none of that. He watches. He studies the way the cat flinches, the way the blood spreads through its fur, the way sound changes as the breathing gets weaker. He's observing pain, not reacting to it. Harry, as a cop, has seen this before, not in his backyard, but in case files and interrogation rooms. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that overlap between domestic space and crime scene, because for Harry, this moment collapses the distance between the two. Animal cruelty is not a random misbehavior in forensic psychology. It's one of the classic McDonald triad markers that show up again and again in the early histories of violent offenders. Bedwetting, fire setting, hurting animals. On paper, it's a pattern. In front of him, it's his son. The focus is not just on the cut on the cat, but on the calm on Dexter's face. When Harry yanks him back, there's no burst of remorse. No confusion about why this might be wrong. Dexter isn't pleading, he's explaining. He talks about wanting to see what would happen, how long it would take, how the body works. The central question in his mind is mechanical, not moral. That's the moment Harry's professional instincts fully switch on. We watch him mentally cross-reference this scene with the offenders he's investigated. The teenager who started with neighborhood pets, the man who buried shoeboxes of bones, the killer who described his first animal as practice. The overlap is too precise to file under phase, or boys will be boys. Each major section will later trace how Harry's plan to manage this darkness fails. But here is where the plan is born. In this backyard, Harry stops hoping Dexter will just grow out of it. He doesn't see a wounded child experimenting with control. He sees a budding predator rehearsing. And as he looks from the bleeding animal to Dexter's steady eyes, he starts considering something no parent wants to contemplate. Maybe the only question left is not whether Dexter will kill, but how to control who, when, and why. Which is exactly what leads him to the next step, turning this private horror into a private code. Harry thinks a private code might be enough. Contain Dexter, direct him, keep the worst-case scenario theoretical. But then we get the graveyard. Picture it, damp Florida soil, a crooked row of makeshift crosses, and a teenage Dexter out there at dusk. not to mourn, but to work. He's standing over a freshly covered patch of ground, shovel in hand, or worse, he's already on his knees, methodically digging up what he buried days before. This is not a child saying goodbye to a pet. This is a rehearsal. From the shallow hole, to the carefully wrapped animal, to the way Dexter studies the scene before covering it again, the central question for Harry shifts. It's no longer, why is my son hurting animals? It becomes, why is he treating their deaths like a project? Kill, stage, bury, revisit. That cycle is exactly what Harry has seen in real homicide investigations, and now it's playing out in front of him, scaled down to fit a teenager's world. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the cruelty. Harry's horror comes from the ritual. Dexter isn't dumping bodies and walking away. He's creating a miniature dump site, then returning to it with the same quiet fascination we later see when he revisits crime scenes as a blood analyst. The graveyard is a classroom Dexter has built for himself, and the subject is control. And Harry recognizes the syllabus. He's walked through lonely fields where killers buried their victims in neat grids. He's watched parents kneel over real graves, while detectives whisper about offenders who come back to check on their work. Along the way, he's learned to read the difference between impulsive violence and patterned behavior. Standing in that pet cemetery, watching Dexter's calm, organized process, he realizes his son is not experimenting with anger. He's perfecting logistics. Dexter, for his part, is absorbed in the process, the digging, the concealment, the secrecy. He studies how deep the hole needs to be, how the soil packs, how the surface looks when it's clean. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what Dexter thinks he's doing and what he's actually training himself to do. Here, he thinks he's just making the urge manageable. In reality, he's beta testing the disposal rituals that will define his adult kills, from plastic-wrapped rooms to ocean dumps. For Harry, this is the no-going-back moment. The plan to wait it out, to hope therapy or time will fix Dexter, collapses in that graveyard. Each major section will later show us a new failure of control. But this is the first, the realization that his son is rehearsing, even if Dexter doesn't consciously understand it yet. After this night, Harry can't ask, "What's wrong with my son?" without also asking something much darker. When animals stop working, who is he going to bury next? And Harry doesn't leave that question in the graveyard. We cut to him at his real altar, a fluorescent-washed squad room late at night, with case files fanned out like a deck of worst-case scenarios. Crime scene photos, autopsy reports, typed profiles of men who tortured animals before they ever touched a human victim. Everywhere he looks at work, he sees an echo of what's starting to happen at home. This is where the cop and the father start to fuse. To keep this clear, Harry isn't guessing in the dark. He's mentally overlaying Dexter's behavior onto patterns he's spent decades hunting. Lack of empathy when other kids cry. That flat, almost bored affect at traffic fatalities. The way Dexter's fascination with blood moves from childish curiosity to methodical dissection. Stabbing a raccoon is one thing. Bagging the parts, labeling them, and burying them in a neat grid, that looks like rehearsal. From Harry's desk, we feel the investigation turn inward. He flips through a file on a serial he arrested who started with cats, another who used to sneak out at night, lying easily to his parents. The central question becomes unavoidable. If these traits in strangers predicted a killing career, what does it mean when he's watching them form in his own son? His training primes him to see a trajectory, and once he sees it, he can't unsee it. This is a man conditioned to look for escalation. Fantasies to animals. Animals to people. Impulse to ritual. So when Dexter shows that eerie calmness around violence, not shock, not teenage bravado, just a practiced stillness, Harry reads it as a stage on a familiar path, not a phase that time will fix. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this bias. The same skills that make Harry a decorated cop also lock him into believing that Dexter is not a risk, but an inevitability. And that's where the internal conflict sharpens. At the kitchen table, he wants to be the man who believes in second chances. At his desk, surrounded by photos of victims whose early warning signs were ignored. He's the detective who knows what that denial costs. The focus is not just on saving Dexter from prison, it's on saving future, faceless victims from the consequences of Harry doing nothing. So he does the only thing he knows how to do. He profiles Dexter like a case. Each major section of his mental file is filled in with unprecedented access. Childhood trauma in the shipping container, escalating cruelty, lies that come too easily, no physiological panic around blood. Unlike his usual unknown subject, he can watch this one grow in real time. That's why, when Harry later builds the code, it isn't a wild experiment to him. It feels like a controlled response to data. He's extrapolating from every killer he's pursued, arrested, or interviewed, betting that if he can redirect the plan rather than stop it, he can prevent a larger collapse. But as he keeps studying Dexter, night after night, one fear keeps creeping in around the edges. If therapy, punishment, and moral lectures haven't shifted the trajectory yet, what makes him think his code will? Harry's fear doesn't form in a vacuum. It forms against a backdrop of institutions he's watched fail for years, from interrogation rooms to courtrooms to the back seats of patrol cars. He's seen the same pattern repeat, people with urges like Dexter's slipping through cracks that were never designed to hold them in the first place. So what were Harry's options, realistically? To keep this clear, we can group them into three obvious paths: therapy, institutionalization, and preemptive law enforcement. On paper, each of these looks like a responsible adult response. You find your teenage son in a graveyard, digging up animal corpses he's carefully killed and arranged, and you call a professional, you call a hospital, you call the police. That's the socially acceptable plan. But Harry is a cop in Miami, not a parent in a brochure. He sat across from charming monsters who quote insight back at therapists, who memorize the language of remorse, who treat sessions like another stage to practice control. Dexter's flat affect, his clinical fascination with blood, the way he narrates his own emptiness to Harry as if he's describing weather, that doesn't reassure Harry that therapy will fix it. It convinces him therapy will be easy to fake. We can feel his skepticism harden every time he remembers a case where a killer graduated from treatment with a glowing report, only for the investigation to circle back to them months later. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between what systems promise and what they actually deliver. Because for Harry, the central question isn't, can Dexter open up? It's what happens when a boy who can't feel learns the right words to say. Institutionalization looks harsher but safer. Lock Dexter away, put a label on him, let experts manage the risk. Yet, Harry knows what that really means. The moment Dexter is committed, Harry loses primary influence. Dexter becomes a file, a diagnosis, a liability calculation. The facility might harden him, surrounding him with more damaged people, or, worse, decide after a few compliant years that he's safe to release. Then, Dexter walks out with no code, no oversight, and a resentment Harry can't reach. Turning him in preemptively is the darkest branch of this decision tree. Legally, Dexter hasn't killed anyone yet. There's no body, no blood slide, no crime scene Harry can point to without fabricating evidence. And morally, handing his son to a system he doesn't trust feels like its own kind of murder. Harry's cop mentality is built on evidence and aftermath. The machine he serves reacts once the damage is done. It doesn't know what to do with a hypothetical Bay Harbor butcher. All of this funnels Harry toward a grim conclusion. If therapy can be manipulated, if institutions can misfire, if the law can't move until it's too late, then the only person who might shape the killer Dexter is becoming is Harry himself. This is the psychological and practical corner he backs himself into. The moment where training Dexter doesn't present as a wild fantasy, but as the least catastrophic option. And once he steps over that line, the next phase of his plan, the construction of the code, starts to look less like guidance and more like the first move in a much larger collapse. Harry doesn't sit down to write a bedtime story. He sits down to write an operating manual for murder. The code is born from a single, brutal assumption. Dexter is going to kill. That's not a fear Harry thinks he can talk away in therapy. It's a fixed point in the trajectory. Once Harry crosses that mental line, everything becomes variables. Not if Dexter kills, but who he kills, how he kills, and whether an investigation ever connects those bodies back to the boy Harry pulled from the shipping container. In that sense, the code is less a philosophy and more a containment field. It's the tape outline around a crime scene that hasn't happened yet. To keep this clear, look at the 3 pillars Harry drills into Dexter. Don't get caught, only kill those who deserve it, and be absolutely sure. On the surface, it sounds like a dark moral system. Underneath, it's pure cop anxiety. Don't get caught is Harry's professional nightmare talking. He's seen sloppy killers leave fibers, prints, patterns. So he turns Dexter into the anti-suspect. Meticulous forensics, no witnesses, no evidence, no pattern the department can read. The focus is not just on Dexter staying alive, it's on Harry never having to see his own son on a caseboard. Only kill those who deserve it maps directly onto Harry's frustration as a detective. Season after season, he's watched monsters walk on technicalities. So he repurposes that anger into a filter. If Dexter is going to be a killer, Harry decides, then at least the victims will match the files that already haunt him. It's not mercy, it's triage. And be sure is the cop's terror of wrongful conviction twisted into a private standard of proof. Harry knows what it means to ruin innocent life with a bad arrest. He cannot live with Dexter doing the same thing with a knife, so he builds a miniature investigation protocol into the code. Evidence, pattern, confirmation, no body on the table unless the case would hold up in court. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this point, because it's easy to romanticize the code as some grim ethical framework. It isn't. For Harry, it's risk management. A way to channel what he sees as inevitable violence toward targets he can live with, and away from the random, escalating cruelty he recognizes in young Dexter's animal graves. That's the chilling implication. Harry isn't trying to stop a serial killer from emerging. He's trying to manufacture a controlled, precision version of the predators he spent his life chasing. You don't design a detailed, step-by-step plan like this unless you're convinced the behavior it governs cannot be prevented, only directed. Along the way, the code also becomes Harry's alibi to himself. If he can recast the shipping container as the origin of a necessary evil, if he can tell himself Dexter is doing what the system can't, then his failure to save that child becomes the seed of a twisted justice, not just a wound he never closed. But here's the turn the code never anticipates. While Harry thinks he's writing rules for Dexter's actions, he's actually rewriting Dexter's entire worldview. And when Dexter eventually realizes what that really means, the collapse of the code won't just be operational. It will be existential. Harry doesn't just write a code and hope Dexter reads it correctly. He builds a curriculum. And the moment we see him step over that line from worried parent to active trainer, we understand how convinced he is that this trajectory cannot be reversed. Let's kick things off with those early ride-alongs. Harry brings a teenage Dexter to real crime scenes, not as a scare tactic, but as a classroom. We watch him walk Dexter through blood spatter, entry wounds, and trace evidence. He explains how killers get caught, how investigators think, how an investigation unfolds. This isn't "don't end up like this." It's "pay attention, you're going to need this." The focus is not just on danger in the abstract, but on method, procedure, and loopholes. From there, the lessons get painfully practical. Gloves on before touching anything. Don't shed hair. Don't bleed. Don't take trophies that can be traced. Harry drills Dexter on how to pick dump sites, how to time his movements, how to build an alibi that will hold up when another cop starts asking the wrong questions. We move from people get caught because they're sloppy to you will not be sloppy. This is operational training, not moral guidance. You don't rehearse disposal plans with someone you think might grow out of it. And that is the central question Harry's behavior answers for us. What kind of father sits his son down and explains how to commit the perfect murder? The only rational explanation is that, in Harry's mind, Dexter's violence is inevitable. The dark passenger is not a phase, it's a permanent resident. To keep this clear, Harry is not trying to prevent a first kill. He's trying to prevent the first kill from being a catastrophic failure that exposes everything. So he tests Dexter's judgment long before there's a human body on a table. Hypothetical scenarios first. If a man beats his wife but never goes to prison, does he qualify? What about a drunk driver who walked on a technicality? Harry watches Dexter's answers, measuring impulse versus criteria, making sure the code's deserves it filter is stronger than Dexter's curiosity. We can feel the fear of escalation in those conversations. Harry has seen spree killers, crime scene after crime scene, with no pattern, no control, just chaos. He is trying to engineer the opposite. Structure, rules. A narrow lane for the violence he assumes is coming. But listen to how he talks to Dexter in these moments. It's not father to son. It's handler to asset. Rookie cop to seasoned detective. Harry breaks down cases, assigns mental homework, evaluates risk. Dexter becomes less a child to be protected and more a weapon to be calibrated. Along the way, every lesson rests on one unspoken premise: that Dexter's dark passenger is real, permanent, and simply waiting for its first human victim. Harry isn't asking whether Dexter will kill. He's planning for when. And that plan is about to define everything that comes next. And for a long time, Dexter buys that plan. The code feels like a lifeline, a way to have the dark passenger and still look in the mirror. But when we shift into Dexter's adult perspective, reflecting back, we see the moment that illusion cracks. The investigation doesn't start with his first human kill. It starts years earlier, in Harry's head. Harry didn't just discover Dexter's urges. He anticipated them, prepared for them, and built an entire operating system around a future killer. We watched Dexter piece this together retroactively. Vogel's tapes in Season 8. Harry's old case files. The revelation that before Dexter ever wrapped a victim in plastic, Harry was already consulting a psychiatrist about how to channel his son. To keep this clear, Harry isn't reacting to a crisis. He's designing protocol. Crime scenes as classrooms, ride-alongs as moral lectures, the code as a preemptive structure, not a desperate last resort, that reframes Dexter's identity overnight. He's not a monster who disappointed a loving father. He's a weapon forged by a cop who believed the monster was inevitable. From a boy dissecting animals in a shed to a teenager standing in that graveyard of buried corpses. Every lesson reads differently. Once Dexter understands, Harry walked into those scenes already convinced of the ending. the central question stops being, "What's wrong with me?" and becomes, "What did Harry decide I was allowed to be?" There's a twisted sense of validation in that. Harry saw him clearly and didn't run. Harry stayed, trained him, gave him language and rules, and a story where his violence had purpose. For someone who feels fundamentally alien, that recognition is intoxicating. But baked into that same recognition is something corrosive. The sense that Dexter was doomed from childhood, that every attempt at control is just moving inside the boundaries Harry drew. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to those key scenes where Dexter learns more about Harry's behind-the-scenes planning. Vogel calmly explaining that the code was their joint experiment. The memory of Harry taking teenage Dexter to a crime scene and quietly sorting the world into people who deserve to live and people who deserve to die. Harry's suicide after seeing the full kill room, which Dexter initially reads as shame over a failure, but later understands as horror at a design that worked too well. That's where the betrayal lives. What Dexter thought was a lifeline starts to look like a leash. Every rule becomes proof that Harry never truly believed Dexter could be anything else. No therapy, no genuine attempt at prevention, just containment, weaponization, and a father's need to feel in control of an uncontrollable child. And once Dexter sees that, his belief in his own agency starts to collapse. If Harry always knew he'd be a killer, was Dexter ever really choosing, or just following a script written for him decades earlier? The focus is not just on the murders now, but on the authorship of his entire life. Along the way, that realization raises a darker possibility we'll explore next. If the code was built on Harry's certainty, is it actually saving Dexter, or trapping him in the exact fate Harry predicted? And that darker possibility? It stops being hypothetical the moment Harry actually sees Dexter in a kill room. Not an idea, not a projection, but a living tableau of everything he's been afraid of since that shipping container. The image is simple and sickening. Plastic on the walls, a body on the table, Dexter standing over it with a knife, not trembling, not panicking, but calm, centered, at peace. When Harry steps into that space in the flashbacks, the central question of his entire plan is answered in one look at Dexter's face. This isn't a boy battling an urge. This is a predator in its natural habitat. Up to this point, Harry could lie to himself. Animal corpses in the graveyard? Acting out. A fascination with blood at crime scenes? Occupational contamination from being raised by a cop. Clinical language, neat psychological boxes, the illusion of control. To keep this clear, Harry could always say, "We're still in prevention mode." But watching Dexter after a kill, we see what Harry sees. There is nothing preventative about this. Dexter's expression isn't horror at what he's done. It's relief, fulfillment, a quiet, almost serene satisfaction that tells Harry in an instant that the urge isn't a symptom to be treated. It's Dexter's primary experience of being alive. That's why this moment hits different from every earlier red flag. The dead animals didn't smile back. The graveyard didn't look content. This is the first time Harry witnesses the completed circuit, fantasy, preparation, execution, and then that post-kill glow. The focus is not just on the violence, but on the pleasure attached to it. Once Harry sees that pleasure, the entire psychology of what he's doing with the code collapses. We can feel his internal investigation short-circuit in real time. Shock first, then revulsion, then the dawning realization that the abstract fear, my son might become a killer, is already obsolete. Dexter is a killer. Harry's years of training haven't delayed anything. They've delivered Dexter to this exact table, under this exact light, with this exact look on his face. And that look doesn't just haunt him, it breaks him. Along the way, the series connects this moment directly to Harry's later breakdown and suicide. He doesn't just discover what Dexter is, he discovers what he himself has become by designing a code that made this scene possible. If this is the endpoint of his guidance, what does that make Harry? From here on, every earlier sign retroactively rearranges itself. The animals, the graveyard, the flat affect, none of it was a warning of what might come. It was a prelude to this expression, proof that Harry read the trajectory correctly, but also that reading it didn't save anyone. And once he's seen Dexter's pleasure, Harry is locked in. Therapy can't erase that feeling. Punishment can't unteach it. At best, the code can only redirect it, manage the reality, instead of preventing the outcome. From this point in the story, Harry isn't predicting a future killer. He's project managing the one standing in front of him. And that shift in perspective changes everything about how he sees Dexter, and how Dexter learns to see himself in the next phase of their plan. From here, we have to go back inside Harry, not Dexter. A decorated cop standing in that shipping container, ankle deep in blood, realizing he saved a toddler, but not a mother. That's the origin point of his plan. Failure first, then control is damage control. Harry doesn't just adopt Dexter, he adopts the crime scene. Every flat affect at a family dinner, every too calm reaction at a car crash, every lingering stare at a corpse on a slab gets filtered through that first investigation. In his mind, young Dexter isn't just a weird kid. He's the living consequence of Harry's own inability to stop Laura's murder. The central question quietly shifts from what is wrong with this child to what have I done to this child? To keep this clear, watch how guilt edits his perception. When Harry finds the buried animal corpses in the graveyard, we see a teenager experimenting. Harry sees the shipping container echoing in miniature, blood, death, secrecy. When Dexter talks about urges he can't explain, that could be an opening for therapy, for intervention, for a different trajectory. Instead, Harry hears an indictment of his own failures as a father and as a cop. If Dexter is broken, Harry must have broken him. And Harry is not built to sit with helplessness. His whole psychology is built around control. Stings, wiretaps, informants, carefully staged busts where he's 3 moves ahead. Season after season. We see that mentality echoed in Dexter's own planning, because Harry brings the playbook home. He doesn't know how to nurture a wound, he knows how to manage a threat. So the code becomes less a moral revelation and more a procedural workaround. Can't undo the trauma, can't erase the container. But maybe, if he choreographs the outcome, he can turn random violence into targeted violence, chaos into a pattern that at least feels like justice. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that move, turning existential horror into something that looks like an investigation he can supervise. On the surface, Harry offers Dexter a choice. You can get caught, or you can follow the code. You can pretend to be normal, or you can be who you really are under my rules. But that's an illusion of choice, framed by a man who has already decided what Dexter is. By defining killing as Dexter's only authentic outlet, Harry makes every other path look like self-betrayal or inevitable failure. That's why Harry knows Dexter will become a killer. He can't imagine a world where his own mistakes don't culminate in blood. The code isn't just a response to Dexter's darkness. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy wrapped in paternal concern, a way to prove his original fear was correct and therefore controllable. And once control becomes the only thing holding the story together, we have to ask, what happens the first time Dexter tries to live without that script? Because Harry's greatest act of protection may be the exact mechanism that makes walking away from killing feel impossible in the next stage of their collapse. Harry doesn't just hand Dexter a set of rules, he hands him a worldview. Once Harry decides the only way forward is the code, every conversation, every training exercise becomes a lesson in what Dexter is and what he will always be. Let's kick things off with the core messages Dexter absorbs. First, the urges are permanent. Harry never seriously frames them as a phase, an injury that might heal, or a pattern that could be treated. From the buried animal corpses in the graveyard to the dissected neighborhood pets, every incident is logged as evidence in Harry's private investigation. This is who you are. Second, killing can be justified if the target is right. Harry taking teenage Dexter to crime scenes and calmly walking him through which suspects deserve to die turns homicide into a controlled vocational plan. Third, Dexter's value lies in compliance. If he follows the code, he's not a monster. He's Harry's good project. To keep this clear, that training creates a brutally binary worldview. People become files, potential victims to be protected by his restraint, or potential targets to be evaluated and eventually wrapped in plastic. Morality shrinks down to a checklist. Did they kill first? Are you sure? Have you covered your tracks? Empathy, intrinsic right and wrong, the messy ambiguity of human motives, those barely register. The focus is not just on stopping bad people, but on preserving control over Dexter's own narrative as a necessary killer. Over time, Harry's certainty hardens into Dexter's inner voice. I was born in blood. I have a dark passenger. I'm not like other people. These sound like personal insights, but they're really echoes. Harry is the decorated cop who found a toddler in a shipping container, who watched that boy grow up flat, affectless, fascinated by blood. When Harry predicts you're going to kill, Dexter treats it as a diagnosis from the ultimate authority. The central question is no longer what do I want to become, but how do I live up to what Harry already knows I am? And that's where Dexter's imagination quietly collapses. He doesn't picture a future with therapy, medication, or genuine abstinence, because the one man he trusted never presented those as realistic trajectories. A life without killing isn't a moral aspiration. It's a fantasy that would make Harry wrong. So every attempt to quit in a later season already feels like a temporary deviation, not a true possibility. That lens bleeds into his adult relationships. Rita isn't a partner he might grow with. She's cover, a structure that keeps the code operational. Deb is both beloved sister and potential threat to the system if she learns the truth. Harrison becomes a terrifying mirror, a test of whether the darkness is hereditary and whether Harry's plan can be repeated or must be broken. Along the way, Dexter keeps telling himself he's a killer, pretending at normalcy, never a person who could actually change at the core. Which is where the tragic irony lands. Harry builds the code to protect the world from Dexter, but in doing so, he locks Dexter into an identity where real transformation feels like betrayal. If he stops killing, was Harry wrong? If Harry was wrong, what was all that sacrifice for? Once we see how deeply that certainty is wired into Dexter's psychology, it becomes easier to understand why, every time a plan implodes, he retreats to the same conclusion. Harry was right about me. In the next phase of this collapse, we'll watch what happens when reality starts proving Harry wrong anyway. And this is where the fantasy of certainty runs straight into the wall of Dexter's actual life. Harry thought he'd solved the problem. He believed he had built a closed system, a son who kills in isolation, obeys the rules, and never lets anything or anyone get close enough to interfere. In Harry's head, the model is clean. Identify the urge, define the targets, contain the damage. No wife asking questions, no kids leaving toys in the car, no sister walking through the wrong door at the wrong time. The code assumes a version of Dexter who is almost mechanical, a man whose psychology can be managed like evidence in an investigation box, neatly labeled and permanently sealed. But the series we actually watch is the opposite of that controlled experiment. Dexter falls in love. He marries Rita. He becomes a father. He forges a deeper and deeper bond with Deb. Along the way, he keeps meeting killers who reflect Harry's design back at him, but twisted. Brian offering family without rules, Miguel wanting power without proof, Lumen chasing justice without any code at all. The focus is not just on who Dexter kills, but on how every new attachment destabilizes Harry's original plan. Leela is the first major stress test. She doesn't fear Dexter's darkness. She romanticizes it, exploits it, uses it to pull him away from Rita and the life Harry supposedly wanted for him. Harry never accounted for someone weaponizing Dexter's secret against his relationships, or for the consequences when that person starts killing to protect him. The code can tell Dexter who to put on a table. It cannot tell him what to do when the person who saved him from exposure becomes a threat to his entire trajectory. Then, Trinity blows up the illusion of compartmentalization. Dexter studies him as a model of balance, family man by day, ritual killer by night. Everything in separate boxes. That's Harry's dream scenario, perfected. But as the investigation unfolds, we see the rot underneath: abused children, terrorized wife, a household ruled by violence. Trinity doesn't just shatter Dexter's plan, he proves that the very idea of a contained monster is a lie. Deb's discovery of the truth is the final, personal collision. Harry's code never truly contemplates what happens if Deb finds out. She is supposed to remain protected, innocent, outside the blast radius. Instead, she walks into the church, sees Dexter kill Travis, and the entire structure collapses in one instant. From that point on, every choice Dexter makes is filtered through her pain. Each of these failures forces Dexter to reassess Harry's certainty. If Harry was wrong about how cleanly this life could be managed, what else might he have been wrong about? Because while Harry drilled in the mantra, "You're a killer, Dexter," reality keeps presenting counter-evidence. Dexter grieving Rita, choosing Harrison, weeping over Deb. The central question becomes impossible to ignore. If he can feel love, guilt, and loss this deeply, was he ever the purely hollow creature Harry diagnosed in that shipping container? To keep this clear, every time a plan implodes, it isn't just a tactical mistake. It's another stress test of Harry's original thesis about who Dexter is and must always be. And that leaves us with the next fracture we have to examine. If Harry misjudged the limits of the code, did he also misjudge the limits of Dexter's humanity? So when we pull back for a second, the pattern is brutal. From that toddler in a shipping container, to the dead animals in the yard, to the graveyard where young Dexter calmly talks about wanting to understand what's inside, every new scene doesn't calm Harry down. It tightens the knot. Then the training starts. Crime scenes as field trips. Lessons about deserving it. And, finally, that kill room where Harry watches Dexter enjoy the moment the knife goes in. To keep this clear, Harry's conviction doesn't appear out of nowhere. He's a decorated cop who has seen what trauma does during an investigation, who knows the textbook origin story, early violence, flat affect, obsessive focus. He sees Dexter escalate from morbid questions to hands-on cruelty. He hears the total absence of remorse. When he walks in on Dexter with plastic, tools, and a bound victim, the whole trajectory he feared is suddenly real, in front of him, bathed in fluorescent light. From Harry's point of view, the central question is already answered. Dexter isn't a risk. He's an inevitability. Harry knows his son will become a killer because everything lines up at once. The blood-soaked origin, the behavioral red flags, the professional profile that matches the monsters he's chased, and the personal guilt of being the man who put Dexter in that container in the first place. It feels less like a prediction and more like a confession. This is my fault, so I have to manage it. But here's the critical nuance. What Harry has is not a prophecy. It's a highly informed prediction that he then builds an entire parenting plan around. He doesn't just expect Dexter to kill. He designs the code to shape how that killing will look. He chooses training over treatment, secrecy over psychiatric help, surveillance over genuine emotional connection. The focus is not just on keeping Dexter from getting caught, but on keeping Harry's own nightmare scenario under his control. And that leads us into 3 competing explanations for where Dexter ends up. Maybe it's fate. The trauma and neurology meant he was always going to be a killer, with or without Harry. Maybe it's design, Harry's code, his scripted rituals, his constant framing of Dexter as a predator made the murders not just possible, but inevitable. Or maybe it's fear. Harry's belief that Dexter is a monster becomes the story Dexter internalizes, the self he feels obligated to perform. The problem is, these readings don't cancel each other out. They overlap. Fate gives Harry the initial panic. Design gives him a method. Fear gives that method emotional weight. Each time Dexter acts out, it confirms Harry's worst assumptions, which justifies more control, which further locks Dexter into the identity Harry drew for him. It's a feedback loop that feels like safety, while it quietly accelerates the collapse. In this video, we're going to keep pressing on that loop. As we move through each season, each major section will test Harry's knowledge against Dexter's later choices, relationships, and breakdowns. Did Harry truly see the future, or did he help build it? Because the scariest possibility isn't that Harry correctly spotted a born killer. It's that a father's attempt to prevent a monster may have been the final ingredient in creating one. And that brings us to one of the quietest but most chilling shifts in the entire Dexter mythology. The moment Harry stops talking about Dexter's darkness as a possibility and starts talking about it as a schedule. The grammar changes, the plan changes, and Dexter's whole trajectory locks into place. Let's kick things off with those early flashbacks, where Harry is still clinging to the fantasy that this might not be inevitable. Young Dexter is in the passenger seat, staring out the window, and Harry says things like, "If these urges come back, you call me. Or maybe we can find a way to stop this." That, if matters. It's the language of a parent who still believes in an off-ramp, who thinks control is possible, who treats the darkness like a phase that might burn out. We see it again after the animal graves in the yard. Harry is horrified, but he's still talking in conditional verbs. If you feel this again, you have to tell me. Maybe we can get you help. The focus is not just on what Dexter has already done, but on the hope that early intervention can prevent escalation. This is Harry as cop and father in one body, still running an internal investigation, still gathering evidence before handing down a verdict. Then, the language hardens. By the time we hit those later teenage flashbacks, the if has disappeared. Harry sits Dexter down and says, "There are people who deserve it. When you feel this way, you'll follow a code. Not if. When, not maybe. You will." In this video, we're going to keep tracking these micro shifts, because this is the exact beat where Harry crosses an invisible line. He no longer doubts Dexter will kill. He only worries about how. That shift in wording functions like a diagnosis without paperwork. Harry never looks at Dexter and says, "You are a future serial killer." He doesn't have to. You will need to kill. You'll have to be careful. When you do this, you can't get caught. These phrases are a verdict, dressed up as guidance. The conditional tense has collapsed into the future tense, and with it, Harry's belief in any alternative outcome collapses too. Psychology lives in these tiny choices. When a parent moves from if you screw up to when you screw up, they're not just predicting behavior, they're handing over an identity. Dexter absorbs that. To keep this clear, think about his adult narration. Over and over, he echoes Harry's phrasing. When the dark passenger takes over, I have to follow Harry's code. I will always need to kill. Is that free will talking, or a script he's been reciting since high school? Along the way, this isn't just training, it's branding. The code doesn't simply tell Dexter what to do, it tells him what he is. And once Harry starts speaking, as if the murders are guaranteed, what room is left for Dexter to imagine anything else? Our next step is to watch what happens the first time Dexter tests that identity in the real world, and how fast the fantasy of control falls apart. So when we cut to that next flashback, Harry doesn't ease in with more talk about urges or morals. He opens with a story. A man who beats women. A man the courts can't touch because the evidence keeps falling apart. On the surface, it sounds like a cop venting over a failed case. Underneath, we're listening to the first time Harry quietly asks, if this man disappeared, what would you do? To keep this clear, Harry frames it as a thought experiment. They're in the car, or at the edge of a crime scene, and he keeps his voice flat. Hypothetical, safe, let's say. He tells teenage Dexter, there's someone who really deserves it. No names, no dates, just enough detail to light up Dexter's imagination while Harry pretends they're gaming out a chess problem. It's not therapy. It's a dry run. And this is where Harry's cop brain takes over completely. He doesn't linger on the fantasy of punishment. He goes procedural. Where would you watch him from? How would you confirm the pattern of abuse? What kind of evidence would the investigation look for after he went missing? Step by step, he walks Dexter through surveillance, victim statements, phone records, the way detectives compare timelines. The focus is not just on the kill, but on the aftermath and the paper trail. We can feel the shift. This is no longer a father asking about feelings. This is a sergeant conducting a field briefing. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the scene. Each major section will sound like an operations checklist, not a moral debate. Harry even talks about dump sites, tides, and how long bodies stay hidden in Miami water. He's turning Dexter's private daydreams into a technical manual. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this moment, because it's the hinge where concern becomes planning. Harry watches Dexter as he talks, measuring his reactions the way he'd read a suspect. Does Dexter ask about the women, or about the best place to park? Does he flinch at the idea of pain, or lean forward when Harry mentions gloves, bleach, and avoiding cameras? Harry isn't just teaching, he's testing Dexter's psychology in real time. And the test has layers. On one level, Harry is checking comprehension. Can Dexter follow the logic of an airtight plan? On another, he's checking empathy. Does any part of this disturb him? But there's a third layer that's even colder. By giving Dexter a detailed what you would do scenario, Harry is acknowledging that. One day, Dexter will be standing over a real body, replaying this exact conversation. Is it still hypothetical when both of them expect it to come true? Along the way, the script Harry outlines here becomes the template we later recognize, the careful tailing of the ice truck killer. The way Dexter documents Miguel's victims, the plastic, the drains, the ocean dumps that fuel the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. All of it echoes that first imaginary walkthrough. And once we see it that way, the scene stops looking like prevention and starts looking like rehearsal. Harry isn't steering Dexter away from the edge. He's choreographing how Dexter will jump. The next question is obvious. What happens the first time Dexter takes that choreography into the real world? And what's the first piece of Harry's plan that fails? And once we see it that way, the scene stops looking like prevention and starts looking like rehearsal. Harry isn't steering Dexter away from the edge, he's choreographing how Dexter will jump. But choreography doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from rehearsal tapes in Harry's head, a long archive of tiny moments where Dexter's mask slipped and Harry clocked every frame. Let's kick things off with those early, almost mundane images. 8-year-old Dexter pressed against the back window of Harry's car as they crawl past a freeway accident. Sirens, twisted metal, a sheet over a body. Most kids look away. Dexter doesn't blink. He leans in. His eyes track the blood on the asphalt a second too long. His breathing actually slows, and when Harry tells him, "Don't look," Dexter asks, "Why is there so much?" Not scared. Curious, precise. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that pattern. Concrete slip, immediate reaction. Because the focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on how Harry's entire body becomes an investigation tool. The Empt shrugs it off as shock. The bystanders call it morbid fascination. Boys will be boys. Harry's jaw tightens, his hand freezes on the steering wheel, and the air in the car goes dead. He's not logging a one-off incident, he's filing evidence in an ongoing case. Cut to the kitchen TV a few years later. A newscaster describes a homicide, mentions multiple stab wounds, shows a quick flash of blood on tile. Dexter's mouth twitches into the faintest smile, like someone recognizing a melody they've heard in a dream. His stepmother notices nothing. She's doing dishes, half listening. Harry, in the doorway, goes absolutely still. 2 seconds. That's all it is. But for a decorated cop who spent a career reading micro-expressions on suspects, it's a confession without words. To keep this clear, Harry isn't just a worried parent. He's running a parallel mental case file. The questions Dexter asks about Harry's work are too calibrated. How do you know which blood is from which person? How long before it dries? He's not asking if murder is wrong. He's asking how murder works. Each question is another pin on Harry's internal board, pushing Dexter's trajectory away from phase and toward pattern. The animal graveyard is the escalation that confirms it. We remember the confrontation, teenage Dexter, shovel in hand, holes in the ground, plastic-wrapped corpses of neighborhood pets. But that scene only lands because we've been primed with all the smaller slips, staring at wrecks, smiling at news reports. Clinical questions about blood. By the time Harry is standing in that dirt, flashlight beam shaking, he's not discovering something new. He's watching his working theory harden into fact. Each major section will later show us adult Dexter losing control, but these flashbacks are the show's proof that Harry was never guessing in the dark. The series structures them like evidence exhibits, spliced into present-day failures to remind us Harry has already done this investigation once. The case he built against his own son is what births the code. The next step is brutally simple. If these urges aren't going away, what plan does a cop make when the killer is his child? So when that plan finally detonates, it doesn't happen in a warehouse or a kill room. It happens under fluorescent hospital lights, with Harry Morgan slumped against a corridor wall, realizing the investigation he started on his own son has reached its inevitable conclusion. Dexter has killed, not in theory, not in Harry's training scenarios, but in the real world. A nurse is dead. The body is on a gurney, and Harry, the cop who thought he could control a killer, is staring at the consequences of his own design. Watch that scene closely. Harry doesn't ask, "Did you really do this?" He doesn't interrogate Dexter like a suspect. He already knows. His first reaction is not disbelief that Dexter could kill. It's horror that Dexter finally has. that distinction matters. It tells us this was never an if in Harry's psychology. It was always a when. He's shaking, eyes wet, voice fractured as he stumbles through the corridor. The camera keeps him off center, like the frame itself can't stabilize him. He clutches the railing, looks like he might collapse, and when he finally speaks, the words spill out as confession, not discovery. He says he thought he could help Dexter, guide him, make it better. What kind of father frames his child's murders as a mentoring failure? To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Harry being upset that a crime occurred. This is the architect watching his blueprint become a crime scene. This is the man who took a traumatized boy from a blood-soaked shipping container, cataloged the early signs, animal corpses, graveyard rituals, flat affect, and then built an entire code around the assumption that killing was Dexter's fixed trajectory. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this hallway because it's a narrative pivot. Up to this point, Harry's code can still masquerade as harm reduction. Train Dexter, aim him at deserving targets, keep the collateral damage low. In that hospital, the mask drops. The nurse isn't on a plastic-lined table. She isn't a vetted monster. She is exactly the kind of victim Harry's system was supposed to prevent. That's why his breakdown reads less like shock and more like guilt. He doesn't say, "How could you?" He says, in essence, "What have I done?" The central question for Harry is no longer whether Dexter is a killer. It's whether Harry turned a damaged child into a more efficient one. Did the lessons, the stalking drills, the crime scene field trips accelerate the dark passenger instead of containing it? Along the way, the show has been seeding this collapse. Harry choosing training over treatment, secrecy over real help, a code over actual care. The hospital corridor is where the bill comes due. Harry sees the monster he built, realizes the control he trusted was an illusion, and whispers the line that haunts Dexter's entire life, that he made a mistake with his son. And that mistake takes us back to the real fork in the road. Before the hospital bed, before the confession, there's a moment where Harry has to decide, is Dexter a patient to be treated or a weapon to be calibrated? Let's kick things off with Harry's actual menu of options. As a decorated cop and a father, he could have pushed for psychiatric evaluation, long-term therapy, even some form of juvenile detention once the animal graves came to light. He could have told social services that his adopted son, already traumatized in a shipping container, was now killing neighborhood pets and dissecting them. In any normal investigation, that combination screams for institutional oversight, not a private family plan. Instead, Harry goes off the books. He doesn't call a specialist, he becomes the specialist. He starts taking Dexter to crime scenes, calmly explaining which murderers deserve to die. He walks him through evidence, through the failures of the courts, through the gaps in control that let monsters walk free. And then he offers a solution that only makes sense if you've already given up on healing, a code. Rules for killing. A moral operating system wrapped around a lethal processor Harry has decided he can't replace. To keep this clear, Harry's not choosing between good and evil in his own mind. He's choosing between systems. On one side, the official institutions he knows from the inside, overworked therapists, overcrowded facilities, a juvenile pipeline that might label Dexter and still not stop him. On the other side, his own training, surveillance, procedure, and intimate code he can enforce. The central question for Harry isn't, how do I cure my son? It's, where can I exert the most control over the damage I'm convinced he will do? That's why this decision exposes so much of his psychology. You don't institutionalize a phase, you institutionalize a threat. When Harry watches teenage Dexter stand over that graveyard of animal corpses, he's not seeing a boy experimenting. He's seeing permanent hardware. Something wired in, not a software glitch that a few sessions could patch. His plan to teach Dexter how to kill safely is, in his mind, harm reduction. But look at the consequences. To frame your child as a lifelong danger, you have to believe, with absolute certainty, that the urge will never go away. And here's the tragic paradox that sets Dexter's entire trajectory. By choosing instruction over institution, Harry confirms to himself that Dexter is a killer in waiting. More devastatingly, he confirms to Dexter that his father expects him to kill. The focus is not just on what Dexter does later, but on what he hears in that expectation. Love as conditional, care as contingent on performance. Morality as a private agreement between two conspirators. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that agreement, because this is where the collapse really begins. Harry thinks he's containing a disaster. In reality, he's authorizing a future Bay Harbor butcher and handing him a badge made of fatherly approval. So when Dexter finally steps into his first human kill room, is he making a choice or just following the only instruction manual he was ever given? And that instruction manual is not abstract. It's not philosophical. It's line items. Procedures? Harry doesn't hand Dexter a moral compass. He drafts a field guide for a killer he already believes is in play. Let's kick things off with the most famous rule: never get caught. On the surface, that sounds like generic survival advice, but coming from a decorated Miami cop who pulled a blood-soaked toddler out of a shipping container, it's pure, distilled fear. Harry has spent his career watching investigations close in on people who think they're in control. So when he drills into Dexter's head how to clean a scene, how to avoid cameras, how to blend into the department, he's not teaching ethics. He's teaching counterforensics. The focus is not just on killing, but on outmaneuvering the very system Harry serves. Then there's the headline rule: only kill those who deserve it. This looks like the moral center of the code, the part fans point to when they defend Dexter. But listen to Harry's wording when he takes teenage Dexter to crime scenes. He doesn't say, "These people feel pain like you should." He says, "Some people deserve to die." That's not empathy, that's triage. As a cop and a father, his fear is twofold: that Dexter will target innocents, and that Dexter will look indistinguishable from the predators Harry hunts. So he draws a narrow lane. Kill the monsters I can't catch. Stay in that lane, and maybe you'll pass as a vigilante instead of a headline. To keep this clear, every sub-rule sharpens that operational mindset. Be sure. Be careful. Confirm the evidence yourself. Harry knows wrongful arrests, bad intel, and rushed cases. His nightmare is Dexter, as the sloppy, impulsive killer he spent a career locking up. So he turns Dexter into his own internal homicide unit. Stalk, verify, prepare. It reads less like a moral philosophy and more like a tactical checklist. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. Leave no evidence. This is procedure, not repentance. Notice what's missing. There's no rule about imagining the victim's family, no demand that Dexter try to feel guilt, no hope that a conscience might develop over time. The central question for Harry is never, how do I help my son become good? It's, how do I prevent the worst possible consequences of what he already is? Along the way, the code becomes a hedge against total collapse, not a path back to humanity. In this video, we're going to keep circling that distinction, because the psychology here matters for Dexter's whole trajectory. The very existence of such a detailed code is its own diagnosis. You don't build an operations manual this specific for a hypothetical. You build it for something you think is inevitable. Harry isn't bracing for the possibility that Dexter might kill someday. He is planning for a lifetime of killing, trying to steer it just enough that the Bay Harbor butcher never appears. Of course, as we'll see, when the bodies start to pile up and the bay starts filling with trash bags, that plan doesn't just fail. It backfires. And Harry doesn't leave that backfire to chance. He builds it, brick by brick, in what is basically the most disturbing training montage television ever gave us. Let's kick things off with those ride-alongs. Young Dexter in the passenger seat, Harry in uniform, the city sliding by in neon streaks. But Harry isn't pointing out landmarks. He's pointing out predators. The drunk driver who walked on a technicality. The wife-beater whose victim recanted. The suspected killer, the investigation, couldn't quite close. Harry narrates not with outrage for the victims, but with clinical focus on how these men slip through the system, as if he's pre-selecting future targets. From there, the lessons escalate. Harry brings Dexter to fresh crime scenes, not to scare him straight, but to sharpen his eye. We watch Dexter scan broken glass, blood spatter, entry wounds. Harry asks, "What happened here? How did he do it? Where did he make a mistake?" This is not a morality talk. It's a forensic workshop. Timing, approach, escape route. To keep this clear, Harry is training Dexter to think like both a cop and a killer at the same time. Then come the rehearsals. Harry has Dexter tail a suspected predator through Miami, keeping 2 car lengths back, noting turns, blind spots, witnesses. They practice following on foot, melting into crowds, memorizing routines. It plays like a darkened version of a sports montage. Instead of keep your eye on the ball, it's keep your eye on the mark. Instead of drills for a future career, these are drills for a pathology Harry has already accepted as permanent. The focus is not just on who Dexter will one day kill, but on how he will survive the investigation that follows. Harry drills alibis. Where were you? Who saw you? What can you prove? He points out which surfaces hold prints, which fabrics retain trace evidence, how long blood really glows under luminol. This is the procedural backbone of the code. You don't teach someone about trace transfer and dump sites because you hope they'll abstain. You teach that because you fully expect them to act. And crucially, Harry uses real criminals as case studies, not to cultivate empathy, but to refine eligibility. This man, too impulsive, might draw attention. That one, careful, isolated, a better candidate. Each story becomes a rubric for the code's central question: who qualifies as safe to kill? What does that do to a teenager already dissociated from normal emotion? Along the way, we see the collapse of any illusion that Harry is fighting Dexter's nature. He's engineering its trajectory. He isn't asking, how do I stop this? He's asking, how do I keep this hidden? And that raises the next problem. What happens when a child raised on that level of control starts believing he can apply the same method to every part of his life? When Harry stops asking how to keep Dexter hidden and starts asking where to put the bodies, the psychology of the whole relationship shifts. We move from fear of what might happen to logistics for what will happen. That's the moment hypotheticals harden into architecture. Let's kick things off with those early don't get caught talks. At first, Harry keeps it vague. No witnesses, no trophies, nothing that can be traced. It sounds almost like a scared parent giving generic warnings about consequences. But very quickly, those abstractions acquire walls, surfaces, and drainage. Harry starts pointing out which alleyways never get patrolled, which abandoned buildings sit outside the usual investigation radius, which parts of Miami's industrial fringe have easy access to water and no curious neighbors. From there, the materials arrive. Plastic sheeting, not just as a concept, but as a specific solution to specific forensic problems Harry has spent a career watching unfold. He knows blood spatter patterns, capillary action, how fluids seep into grout and wood grain. So he doesn't simply tell Dexter, "Don't leave blood." He shows him that a room wrapped in plastic with a controlled entry point and a drain is a crime scene that barely exists. This is not a teenager improvising. This is a cop exporting his professional expertise into his son's future murders. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the fact that Harry helps Dexter avoid evidence. It's the level of premeditated process design. You only start thinking about floor slope toward a drain, about sound insulation, about how long it takes for a body to cool in an air-conditioned space, if you are certain the act is going to occur. Each major section of the eventual code has a spatial counterpart. Selection becomes stalking routes, preparation becomes room setup, disposal becomes access to currents and tides. Harry's years on the job are the blueprint's backbone. He's seen sloppy domestic homicides that leave fibers everywhere, cartel killings with chaotic overkill, and the rare, meticulously planned scene that leaves his colleagues frustrated. Which ones stall out the investigation? Which ones collapse under lab analysis? He catalogs those patterns and hands the answers to Dexter in the form of best practices. Remote, controllable, washable, no soil to hold trace, no porous surfaces to drink in blood, no public cameras to catch a silhouette at the wrong time. And here's the moral line he crosses. At this stage, Harry is no longer simply describing the dangers of a crime. He is co-authoring the method. He walks into Dexter's first makeshift setup, doesn't shut it down, doesn't call for help. He critiques. He refines. He teaches. What kind of father rehearses the perfect kill room with his child unless he has fully accepted that child as a killer in need of a system? In this video, we're going to keep circling that contradiction, because this early architecture doesn't stay theoretical. It echoes through every iconic plastic-wrapped tableau we see later, right up until the moment those controlled spaces fail and the walls Harry designed can't hold reality in anymore. And that brings us to the moment Harry stops pretending this is about urges and impulses and starts saying the quiet part out loud. We're back in that teenage flashback, the one that plays almost like a crime scene reconstruction of Dexter's childhood. Harry has followed the trail, the missing neighborhood pets, the off answers, the late nights. He takes Dexter out to the graveyard where the bodies are buried, literally digs into the earth, and uncovers what he's been afraid to name. This is the investigation where the cop in him and the father in him collide, and neither can walk away unchanged. To keep this clear, Harry does something brutally simple. He looks at Dexter, at the rows of animal corpses, and he doesn't say, "You might hurt someone." He says, in effect, "You are going to kill someone. So we have to make a plan." The focus is not just on stopping a behavior. It's on managing a destiny. In that instant, Dexter's urge is reclassified from a problem to be solved into a permanent condition both of them must organize their lives around. Watch Dexter's face in that scene. His shoulders tighten, then drop. His eyes flicker with something like relief when Harry says he understands, that he doesn't hate him, that they'll work on this together. For a kid who has felt alien, surveilled, and inexplicable, being seen is intoxicating. But right under that, there's a collapse. The jaw slackens. The gaze drifts. It's as if, in the same breath that Harry offers control, he closes every other door Dexter might have imagined for himself. This is where the code stops being a set of rules and becomes a prophecy. Harry is the moral authority in Dexter's life, the cop, the parent, the one person whose judgment he never fully questions. When that person defines you as someone who will kill, what happens to your sense of choice? Harry doesn't just anticipate a future crime, he narrates Dexter's entire trajectory as inevitable. The dark passenger gets a name, a structure, and, crucially, an expectation to live up to. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that expectation, because adult Dexter quotes it like scripture. Harry knew what I was. Harry taught me how to channel it. Harry always said. He recites these lines in voiceover, as if they were carved into stone, not spoken in a single panicked conversation over a shallow grave. Each major section will show how often Dexter treats Harry's words less as guidance and more as fate, using them to justify every new kill room, every new identity, every new failure of control. Along the way, that teenage flinch when Harry says you're going to kill turns into a lifelong mantra. Dexter isn't just someone who kills, he is someone who was told he would. And the real question, moving forward, is how much of what happens next is the monster, and how much is the prophecy he can't stop obeying. That prophecy doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of a man with two warring job descriptions, living in the same skull. Harry Morgan, homicide cop, and Harry Morgan, desperate father. To keep this clear, we need to separate those voices. The cop brain has spent years walking crime scenes, cataloging patterns, listening to offenders explain how it started small. The father heart has spent those same years rocking a blood-soaked toddler to sleep, telling himself love can rewrite neurology. When young Dexter starts bringing home stories about blood at school, when he stares too long at a crime scene photo Harry left out, both voices are watching the same behavior and arguing about what it means. In this video, we're going to track how that argument slowly stops being a debate and turns into a verdict. The early signs are explainable. Flat affect, trauma, nightmares, of course. A weird fascination with Harry's gun and case files. Maybe he just wants to be like Dad. The father heart is very good at rationalization. It wants a plan where Dexter grows out of it. Then, Harry follows him into the yard and finds the graveyard. Dead animals, neatly buried, dug up and dissected. From a distance, it's just a teenage boy with a shovel. Up close, it's a textbook escalation, fantasy to practice, curiosity to cruelty, control rehearsed on something that can't fight back. This is where Harry's cop brain starts scoring points it can't unscore. How many interviews has he done with killers who started the same way? How many times has he heard, it was just animals at first? The more Harry loves Dexter, the more ruthlessly he profiles him. That's the paradox hook at the center of their relationship. Every flat, unbothered reaction to death, every lack of remorse when he's caught with blood on his hands, pushes the investigation inward. Harry isn't guessing anymore. He's pattern matching. The shipping container trauma, the affect, the animal cruelty, the graveyard. Taken together, they form a trajectory his training recognizes instantly. This kid will kill. And once that professional label locks in, it never leaves. The focus is not just on whether Dexter is dangerous, but on what kind of danger he will become and how to contain it. Harry's fatherly love doesn't erase the diagnosis, it just changes the strategy. A stranger with these traits gets watched, arrested, institutionalized. A son with these traits gets something far more intimate and far more catastrophic: the code. Each major section will show us how that split decision radiates outward, but the core is simple. Harry's cop brain wins the argument about what Dexter is. His father heart only wins the argument about what to do with him. That's why Harry's certainty feels so heavy. He's not a paranoid dad seeing monsters in the closet. He's a seasoned detective, applying the same pattern recognition he's used to close countless cases. Only this time. The open file is sitting at his own dinner table, and once you've closed that case in your mind, what's the next move? Arrest your son or arm him? Harry doesn't have to invent a monster, because his own case files have already taught him what one looks like. The chilling part is that with Dexter, every theoretical red flag from those files starts showing up in his living room, in his backyard, in the quiet spaces where a parent is supposed to relax. Let's kick things off with the most textbook warning sign: animal cruelty. Young Dexter isn't just rough with pets. He's systematically killing neighborhood animals, then carefully burying and arranging their bodies. For Harry, this isn't a quirky phase. It's the exact escalation pattern he's seen in offender profiles and training manuals, fantasies, experimentation, then hands-on harm to creatures that can't fight back. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that word, escalation. From there, the lack of guilt lands just as hard. When Harry confronts Dexter in the graveyard of animal corpses, Dexter doesn't cry, doesn't panic, doesn't even mount a convincing lie. He observes. He explains. He treats the confrontation like an investigation into his own behavior. Harry has interviewed juvenile offenders who did the same thing, describing their acts with eerie detachment, as if they were talking about someone else's crime scene. That flat affect is not neutral. In Harry's experience, it's the silence where empathy should be. Then there's Dexter's fascination with crime scenes themselves. Most kids would be scared of blood. Dexter is magnetized by it. Harry brings him to a scene once, thinking he can scare him straight, and instead sees Dexter absorbing the layout, the splatter, the methodology. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Dexter being curious. It's on how he's curious, methodical, excited by control, already mentally reverse engineering the killer's plan, rather than recoiling from the consequences. On top of that, Dexter rehearses violent fantasies. He talks abstractly about bad people getting what they deserve. He sketches scenarios in his head, the way Harry has seen adult offenders describe their practice runs before the first actual murder. Each major section of Harry's mental checklist lights up. Childhood trauma, animal cruelty, no remorse, forensic curiosity, fantasy rehearsal. How many boxes have to be ticked before you stop calling it a phase? And this is where the feedback loop turns brutal. Every new behavior doesn't arrive in isolation. It lands on top of Harry's internal case file, thickening it, hardening it, making it harder to pretend this will just fade with time. The more Harry recognizes, the less room there is for doubt. By the time he sits Dexter down and lays out the code, he isn't acting on a vague fear. He's acting on a trajectory he's watched unfold in dozens of reports that ended in bodies. So when Harry decides not to arrest his son, but to arm him with rules, that's not a sudden lapse in judgment. It's the grim conclusion of a cop who believes the pattern is unstoppable and thinks the only variable left is direction. But if you build a system on a pattern you already know ends in violence, what exactly are you steering Dexter away from? And what are you steering him into? And that brings us to the other person living inside Harry's experiment without knowing it, Deborah. If Harry really believed the code could keep Dexter safe and contained, why doesn't he ever bring Deb into that plan? She's not just some background character in his life. She's a cop's daughter, a cop in training, and someone whose entire psychology is built on worshiping Harry as the gold standard of law and order. If there was anyone you'd think he'd loop in, it's her. But he doesn't. Not when Dexter is a teenager burying animal corpses in the yard. Not when Harry starts taking Dexter to crime scenes and quietly explaining which monsters deserve to die. Not even later, when Deb is wearing a badge and working the same investigations Dexter is secretly contaminating. To keep this clear, this is not a casual omission. This is a deliberate blackout. What does that tell us? It tells us Harry doesn't see Dexter's darkness as a theory to be debated. He sees it as a live weapon, sitting in the middle of his family. You don't show your daughter where the bomb is stored. You lock the door, You memorize the combination, and you pray it never goes off while she's in the house. The central question isn't just why did Harry train Dexter, but why did Harry isolate that training from everyone else? Because he believes even the knowledge of Dexter's urges is dangerous. Dangerous to Deb's career, because one hint of complicity could destroy her professionally. Dangerous to her emotionally, because how do you reconcile the brother you adore with the killer your father engineered? And dangerous physically, because if Deb ever tried to stop Dexter, Harry knows exactly how that confrontation could end. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this. You don't hide a maybe, you hide a certainty. Harry doesn't behave like a man managing risk. He behaves like a man containing inevitability. His secrecy with Deb is the clearest signal that in his mind, Dexter will kill. The only question is whether that killing stays pointed outward. Along the way, the show proves him right about the cost of disclosure. When Deb finally steps into the church in season 6 and sees Dexter drive a knife into Travis Marshall, the collapse is immediate. Her identity as a cop, as Harry's daughter, as Dexter's moral anchor, all short-circuit at once. Therapy, panic attacks, the desperate plan to rewrite what she saw, these aren't overreactions. They're the very consequences Harry was forecasting. And when she later learns about the code itself, about Harry's role as architect, her entire hero narrative implodes. Harry isn't the man who protected her from monsters. He's the man who weaponized one and lied to her face. That shatters her far more than the blood ever could. So Harry's silence with Deb doesn't soften his guilt. It sharpens it. He knows exactly what he's built, and he's already afraid of what happens when the truth finally reaches the one person he kept outside the blast radius. Harry's fear of that blast radius is exactly what nudges him into his quiet pivot. He doesn't announce it. There's no big speech where he says, "You're going to kill. So here's how." Instead, the shift creeps in, one word choice at a time, until prevention has quietly collapsed into damage control. Let's kick things off with the early Harry. When Dexter is a kid, the language is still defensive. Don't go near that. Stay away from this. You have to fight those urges. The plan, at least on the surface, is abstinence. Harry is still pretending that if Dexter just avoids certain situations, if he just exerts enough control, the darkness might be contained without ever spilling into an investigation file. Then we hit the graveyard. Harry uncovers the buried animal corpses, sees the trophies, sees the care Dexter has taken. The central question for him changes in that moment. It's no longer, how do I stop this? It becomes, how bad is this going to get if I do nothing? And from that point on, his vocabulary starts to mutate. To keep this clear, listen to the grammar. The don't and stop commands fade. We hear more of when you do feel it. If you're going to act, you have to make sure no one can trace it back to you. That's not a father arguing his son away from the edge. That's a cop teaching a suspect how to beat the system before the crime is even committed. The focus is not just on whether Dexter kills, but on how. Harry takes him to crime scenes, walks him through forensics, explains which killers were sloppy and which almost got away. Technique replaces prohibition. Target selection replaces moral instruction. Only people who deserve it sounds like ethics, but structurally it's logistics. Narrow the list, reduce exposure, minimize collateral consequences. In other words, Harry has rendered his verdict. Dexter's trajectory cannot be rerouted, only narrowed. Like a river he believes will flood no matter what. So he builds higher walls, the code, the rules, the rituals. Don't stop the water. Just make sure when it breaks, it doesn't wash over Deb, or the department, or Harry's own reputation. Along the way, that damage control mindset creates its own tragedy. Every time Harry says, "When you do, Dexter hears," you will. Every "you" have to make sure no one finds the body lands as permission, not warning. The code stops being a break and becomes a green light. A promise that killing is inevitable and, if done correctly, almost righteous. And once Dexter internalizes that promise, his entire psychology reorients. He's not a potential killer fighting a fate, he's an inevitable killer perfecting a craft. The next step is obvious and catastrophic. What happens when that sanctioned craft collides with real relationships and real failure? And the walls Harry built aren't nearly high enough? Once Harry turns killing into a sanctioned craft, there's one thing he's still clinging to in the background. The fantasy that Dexter might hate it. That maybe the urge will be mechanical, ugly, something his son endures rather than embraces. The central question for Harry isn't just will Dexter kill anymore, it's what will it do to him when he finally does. We get our answer in that early flashback, when teenage Dexter comes home from either his first real kill or a near miss that went right up to the edge. The house is quiet. Harry's watching him the way a cop watches a suspect, not the way a father watches a kid who missed curfew. Dexter walks in, clothes a little too neat, movements a little too smooth, and there's this eerie stillness in him. No shaking hands, no wide eyes, no visible collapse of control. Instead, there's that tiny glint, a looseness in the shoulders, the kind of calm that usually only shows up after sex, a fight, or a long-planned act finally carried out. Harry asks a simple question. Are you okay? Dexter says he feels better. Not guilty, not scared. Better, and we see it land on Harry's face in real time. Recognition, not surprise. To keep this clear, Harry has seen that expression before. Not on victims, not on traumatized witnesses, but on offenders at the end of an investigation. The guy who finally killed the woman he'd been stalking for years. The predator who admits, with quiet relief, that the fantasy wasn't enough, and now he can finally sleep. That's the look Harry reads in Dexter's eyes. Relief, not remorse. Satisfaction, not shock. In that moment, the psychology shifts for Harry. Compulsion alone, he can imagine treating. Compulsion plus enjoyment? That's the profile he knows almost never walks away from violence. This isn't a boy horrified by what he's done and begging to be saved. This is a boy who has tasted the thing he was built around and found that it fits. What do you do with that, if you're the one who wrote the code that led him there? From here, Harry's plan stops being, maybe we can prevent the worst, and hardens into the worst is already here. We just have to contain it. The focus is not just on rules anymore, but on logistics, secrecy, and minimizing consequences. Each major section of Harry's life with Dexter turns into risk management, new procedures, new cautions, more elaborate justifications. The father disappears behind the handler. And along the way, that single memory starts to rot. By the time we reach Harry's hospital confession, when he tells Dexter he was wrong and that he cannot live with what he's created, we can trace it back to that glint of satisfaction in the doorway. Harry realizes he didn't just redirect a dangerous urge, he helped a true predator refine it. The despair we see in that hospital bed isn't sudden. It's the delayed impact of a truth he recognized years earlier and tried fatally to manage instead of refuse. The tragedy is that Dexter reads that despair as abandonment, not warning, which means the next phase of his trajectory is defined by what happens when the code outlives its creator and the illusion of control is all Dexter has left. Harry's death leaves Dexter alone with the one thing Harry never took back, the belief that Dexter is, at his core, a killer. That belief isn't just background noise, it's the operating system underneath every lesson, every warning, every line of the code that Dexter clings to after that hospital bed scene. To keep this clear, we can trace Harry's entire plan back to one non-negotiable assumption: Dexter will kill, and nothing can stop that, only shape it. The language is absolute. You can't help what you are. You have to be sure he deserves it. From the first time Harry catches teenage Dexter with buried animal corpses to the graveyard confrontation, there's no space for, what if this changes? There's only, how do we manage the inevitable? The code, the secrecy, the private training sessions at crime scenes where Harry points at bodies and talks about who deserved to die. All of it is architecture, built around that one fixed diagnosis. In this video, we're going to lean into the psychology of that move, because this is where prediction starts mutating into prophecy. In psychological terms, a self-fulfilling prophecy happens when a belief about someone's future behavior shapes how they're treated, and that treatment funnels them toward the very outcome that was predicted. When your primary attachment figure treats you as destined to become a serial killer, what other selves are even on the table? Look at Dexter's identity options as Harry presents them. There is no version where Dexter is simply a traumatized kid who might heal. No version where long-term therapy, medication, or institutional support are seriously pursued. The choice Harry gives him is binary: be an uncontrolled monster who gets caught, or be a controlled monster who follows the code. That's not guidance. That's a narrowing of the entire horizon of who Dexter is allowed to imagine himself becoming. How do you rebel against a destiny that's been framed as both inevitable and, in its guided form, heroic? And this is the dark irony. Harry's attempt to save lives by controlling Dexter may have locked Dexter more tightly into the role of killer than Dexter's urges alone ever would have. Before Harry intervenes, we see animal cruelty, morbid curiosity, emotional flatness, disturbing, yes, but still malleable. Once Harry starts rehearsing murder as a skill set, drilling disposal methods, teaching forensic countermeasures, he's not just containing risk, he's professionalizing it. The investigation Dexter will one day help lead at Miami Metro is built on the same technical expertise Harry encouraged in private. From a psychological standpoint, Harry becomes both the first cop to diagnose the danger and the architect who gives that danger a mission statement. The focus is not just on what Harry saw in Dexter, but on what Harry decided that vision meant. The central question shifts. Harry knew Dexter was going to become a killer because he saw the signs. But the moment he acted as if that future was fixed, he stopped merely predicting Dexter's trajectory and started building it. One rule, one secret, one necessary kill at a time. So, when the code outlives its creator, what happens to a life designed around someone else's prophecy? That's where Dexter's illusion of control really begins to crack, and that crack starts with Harry realizing the thing he built to save Dexter was never a cure. It was a fence, a quarantine line around something he now believes can't be removed. When Harry first lays out the code, he sells it to himself like a treatment plan. Rules, structure, a way to give this damaged kid a shot at a controlled life. If Dexter can only kill people who deserve it, maybe the urge burns out, maybe maturity or therapy or sheer willpower does the rest. That's the fantasy. But as the years go on, the investigation in Harry's own head changes. He stops looking for signs of healing and starts tracking patterns of escalation. Let's kick things off with the moment that shatters the illusion. Teenage Dexter has followed the code perfectly. He stalked a predator, confirmed the victims, prepared the space. Harry walks in after the fact and sees the full kill room for the first time. Plastic hung with methodical care, tools laid out with clinical precision, a body neatly wrapped. No panic, no mess, no improvisation. Harry expects to find a shaken kid in shock. Instead, he finds Dexter calm, almost serene, walking him through the plan like a science project. There is no remorse, only satisfaction that the ritual worked, that the code worked. Dexter's voice is flat, but his eyes are bright. He's proud of himself. From that image, we get the central question that rewires Harry's psychology. If following the code doesn't produce guilt, only better killing, what exactly has he created here? This is where Harry's background as a cop quietly takes over. Cops don't believe in miracles. They believe in risk management, in containment, in reducing the damage when you can't eliminate the threat. So, Harry pivots. Internally, the question isn't, how do I stop Dexter from killing? Anymore, it becomes, when he kills, how do I make sure it doesn't destroy him? Deb, the department, everything. The focus is not just on Dexter's urges, but on the collateral consequences, investigations, patterns, witnesses, the slow build toward exposure. You can hear that pivot in his language. Earlier, Harry talks about maybe this will help, like the code is a bridge back to normal. After that kill room, it hardens into commands: never get caught, never leave evidence, never deviate. More rules, more conditions, more emphasis on control, because he has quietly accepted that the killing itself is non-negotiable. And here's the ominous part. By treating Dexter's urges as permanent, Harry effectively locks his son's identity into place. Dexter isn't someone wrestling with impulses anymore. He's a killer who must be managed, trained, refined. The code stops being a temporary brace and becomes the skeleton of Dexter's entire life. In this video, we're going to keep tracing how that decision echoes forward, season after season. Because if the code is only a containment system, not a cure, then we have to ask, what happens the first time Dexter decides the walls Harry built are too small and steps outside them? So when we finally get to the first real hunt, Harry isn't just supervising. He's testing whether the thing he built is a cage or an invitation. The code is in place, the rules are rehearsed, and now we watch what happens when theory hits pavement. Let's kick things off in that car. Engine off, windows cracked, Miami humidity pressing in. Harry sits in the dark across from a dingy bar, eyes on Dexter as he trails a confirmed predator into the night. You'd expect a teenager about to commit his first human kill to look rattled, right? Sweaty palms, darting eyes, some visible crack in his illusion of control. Instead, Harry sees something else. Dexter moves along the sidewalk with an easy rhythm, shoulders loose, head slightly tilted, like he's listening to music only he can hear. There's a small, unforced smile at the corner of his mouth when the target pauses under a streetlight. Not glee, not mania, predatory patience. For a seasoned cop, those tiny details land like alarm bells. To keep this clear, Harry had been hoping for dread. The plan was that the code would feel like a grim chore, a necessary, ugly maintenance job Dexter performs to keep the urges from spilling out everywhere. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the room, leave no evidence. In Harry's mind, each step should have been heavy, reluctant, weighed down with the knowledge of what he's about to do. But what he sees through the windshield is anticipation. Dexter isn't rushing. He's savoring. The way he hangs back half a block, the way his gaze narrows when the man fumbles with his keys, the way his breathing actually seems to slow as the situation becomes more dangerous. This is not a boy merely obeying instructions. This is someone discovering that the hunt itself is pleasurable. And once pleasure enters the system, it becomes self-reinforcing. That's the central question for Harry in this moment. Is the code a break, or is it a training program for a more efficient predator. We can feel his mind running an internal investigation, cross-referencing what he's seeing now with the early warning signs he's tried to ignore. The calmness around blood in the shipping container story, the fascination with crime scenes he should have found disturbing, the buried animal corpses in the graveyard that didn't scare Dexter at all. Now all of that is back, amplified. Dexter waits for the perfect blind spot in the alley cameras, and his expression actually brightens, just a fraction, as the window opens. Harry feels two things at once: pride that Dexter followed the code to the letter, dread that he clearly loved the process. Along the way, Harry realizes he hasn't just managed a disorder, he's been coaching a talent. And as he watches Dexter disappear into the dark after his target, he doesn't see a boy managing urges anymore. He sees the outline of what Dexter will become, a future predator, learning, step by step, to enjoy the chase. And once Harry sees that predator outline, he does what any cop does when instinct isn't enough. He starts testing, quietly, repeatedly, not in the interrogation room, but in the living room. Picture the scene, late night, flickering blue light from the TV, a local news report about a hit and run or a murdered woman on South Beach. Rita's not in the picture yet. It's just Harry on the couch, teenage Dexter nearby, half in shadow, pretending to watch. The anchor shows a crying mother begging for answers. The camera lingers on her face. Harry doesn't change the channel. Instead, he glances sideways. Rough, huh? A simple line, but for Harry, it's the start of an investigation. The central question isn't only, is Dexter dangerous? Anymore, it's, is there anything in him that can actually stop him? To keep this clear, Harry isn't just listening to Dexter's words. He's watching for timing, for micro-expressions, for that automatic wince we get when we see someone else in pain. He asks, almost casually, how do you think her family feels right now? Then he waits. 1 second. 2, 3, Dexter finally answers. They must be devastated. It's terrible. On paper, that's correct. In real life, it lands with a thud. No warmth, no spontaneous concern, no overflow of distress that has to be contained. It's like Dexter is pulling the right line from a mental filing cabinet labeled things normal people say. The words fit. The rhythm doesn't. Harry has spent decades reading faces under fluorescent lights. He's seen sociopaths who cry on cue, traumatized kids who can't make eye contact, guilty men who overperform their outrage. He knows what simulated emotion looks like, and what he's seeing in his son is simulation with training wheels. Along the way, Dexter gets better at it. The more Harry probes, the more Dexter learns the script. Another news report. Another question about the victim's kids. Another pause just a beat too long before the appropriate response. Paradoxically, the more Dexter improves his performance, the more certain Harry becomes that there's nothing underneath it. Real empathy doesn't need rehearsal. This is the chilling turn. Harry realizes Dexter's empathy is almost entirely cognitive. He can describe what fear is, define grief, map out what guilt should feel like, but he doesn't inhabit those states. He observes them, like another crime scene to catalog. The focus is not just on what Dexter says, but on what never shows up in his eyes. And when Harry accepts that, his plan hardens. Dexter can't feel empathy reliably, then internal brakes are gone. All that's left is external structure. The code stops being an experiment and becomes a wall he has to build high enough, thick enough, specific enough to contain something that will never care on its own. But that raises a darker question we'll keep circling back to. If the only thing standing between Dexter and indiscriminate violence is a set of learned rules, What happens the first time reality pushes hard enough that those rules crack? So when do those rules actually start to bend? Not in a warehouse, not on a boat, but at Harry's kitchen table, over what sounds like homework and turns out to be the first real stress test of the code. Let's kick things off with a deceptively simple image. Teenage Dexter, elbows on cheap formica, asking his cop father what amounts to a legal seminar on murder. He doesn't say, "Can I kill more people?" He says, "What if they're guilty, but there's no evidence yet? What if the investigation just hasn't caught up?" It's framed as curiosity, as a kid trying to understand boundaries. But the central question underneath is colder. How far can I go and still call it following the rules? To keep this clear, these aren't the questions of someone learning a moral system. These are the questions of someone mapping a contract. Dexter asks if it still counts as obeying the code if he knows in his gut that someone did it, if witnesses are unreliable, if the case might fall apart in court. He wants to know whether proven means a conviction, an arrest, a file on Harry's desk, or just a confident hunch. He is not seeking restraint. He is defining the outer edge of permission. Watch how Harry reacts. At first, he answers like a cop. The system might catch them later. Evidence takes time. They could be under investigation already. We can almost hear the justifications stacking up. But as Dexter keeps pushing, what if they don't get caught? What if they're too careful? Harry realizes this isn't about faith in due process. It's about contingency plans for when the system fails, and Dexter's urge doesn't. Along the way, there's a tiny, chilling detail. Dexter's eyes don't light up when Harry says no. They light up when Harry admits there are gray areas. When Harry concedes that sometimes the courts fail, that some killers slip through, Dexter leans forward. That's the opening. That's the space where judgment becomes subjective, where a clever mind can say, Harry would have wanted this, even when Harry absolutely would not. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between what Harry thinks he's saying and what Dexter actually hears. The focus is not just on the code as a set of rules, but on Dexter's psychology as he quietly repurposes those rules into a shield for whatever he already wants to do. Harry starts to suspect it in real time. His son isn't simply complying, he's rehearsing arguments, stockpiling justifications, preparing to stand in his own imaginary courtroom and declare himself innocent. That's the real danger Harry glimpses. Not open rebellion, but reinterpretation. A future where Dexter never feels out of control, because the code can always be updated in his head to match the kill he's already decided on. By the end of that conversation, Harry feels it, if the debate in Dexter's mind is already more flexible than the words coming out of Harry's mouth. Then, the collapse hasn't happened yet on the outside, but inside, the first hairline fractures are already there, waiting for the moment a real target finally forces those cracks wide open. And once Harry feels those hairline fractures, his imagination does something crucial. It jumps ahead. He stops picturing a future where the urges fade and Dexter grows out of it, and starts quietly running worst-case scenarios, like a cop planning a raid on his own house. We can almost see the montage in Harry's head. A body half buried in a park, a jogger's dog digging up plastic sheeting, a rookie on patrol popping a trunk and finding one of Dexter's neatly wrapped trophies. Dexter pulled over with blood on his shoes. Or worse, Dexter on a table that isn't his, floodlights in his eyes, surrounded by uniforms he recognizes. To keep this clear, Harry isn't fantasizing about if Dexter kills again. Every scenario assumes he does. The only variable is when the collapse hits the investigation. So, Harry builds a backup plan. Not on paper, never out loud, but in the way he sharpens his questions and starts rehearsing lines he hopes he'll never say. In this video, we're going to lean into that unspoken rehearsal, because it surfaces in one of the tensest conversations Harry ever has with teenage Dexter. On the surface, it's another talk about being careful. Underneath, it's a contingency briefing. Harry pushes a little harder than usual. He doesn't just say, "Don't get sloppy." He says, "If you pick the wrong man, if you make a mistake, there might be nothing I can do." The focus is not just on operational failure, but on what Harry himself will have to become if Dexter crosses a line the code can't excuse. Dexter hears it as a warning about consequences. Harry is hearing himself as a cop, outlining the point where he stops being a father and starts being the arresting officer. Listen to the subtext. He doesn't threaten punishment like a disciplinarian. He talks about evidence, about witnesses, about how fast an investigation moves once a pattern appears. He frames it in the language of reports and procedures, not grounding or disappointment. Underneath every sentence is an unspoken question. If I'm the one who finds your body, your victim, your mistake, what will I do? That's the turning point. From here on, Harry's plan no longer includes a version of Dexter who simply doesn't kill. Each major section of his mental flowchart assumes ongoing homicides, ongoing risk, ongoing need for containment. He's no longer trying to prevent a killer from existing. He's trying to manage a killer he already accepts as permanent. And emotionally, that acceptance tears him in 4 directions at once. He loves Dexter. He loves Deborah. He loves his badge. He loves the idea that justice still means something. In his darkest projections, those loyalties collide in a single scene: Deborah in danger. Dexter exposed, Harry forced to choose whether he draws his weapon on his own son. You don't build that kind of backup plan for a remote possibility. You build it because you're convinced the lethal risk is real, ongoing, inevitable. Along the way, Harry stops being just the architect of the code and becomes something colder, the man quietly practicing how to stop the weapon he's forged if, or when, that code finally fails. And then the universe hands Harry proof of concept. Mid-career, he catches a case that feels eerily like a forecast. A woman strangled in her kitchen. No signs of forced entry, no sexual assault, no obvious motive. The crime scene is almost surgically clean, like someone rehearsed control rather than rage. As the investigation widens, a pattern emerges. An ex-boyfriend with no record, a solid job, neighbors who say he's polite, helpful, quiet, on paper, a normal guy. In Harry's gut, a familiar chill. Let's kick things off with that interrogation room, because that's where the psychology snaps into focus. Under the harsh fluorescent light, this suspect sits with perfect posture, hands neatly folded, voice steady. He says all the right things about being devastated, about missing her smile, but there's nothing behind the eyes. Flat affect. Rehearsed empathy. When Harry asks him to describe the victim, he slips, just once, and calls her the body instead of her. One word. Total reveal. He's not talking about a person. He's talking about an object that failed to stay under his control. To keep this clear, Harry isn't just reading a liar. He's watching a man who compartmentalizes violence so completely that the murder feels like a private correction, not a moral event. The central question becomes less did he do it, and more, how long has he been like this? And as Harry pushes, asking about childhood pets, fights at school, how he felt the first time he saw blood, he realizes he's drifting into a script he's used before, not just at work, at home. Cut to the kitchen table that night. Dexter, teenage, blankly poking at his food. Harry hears himself ask, almost word for word, "Do you ever get angry and not know why? Do you remember what it felt like the first time you saw blood?" These are not casual dad questions. These are interrogation prompts. Along the way, The line between raising a son and profiling a suspect quietly collapses as the homicide investigation tightens around the boyfriend. Harry builds a psychological profile, controlled exterior, secret violent urges, an internal narrative that justifies harm as necessary. It maps, almost point for point, onto what he's already seen in Dexter, those buried animal corpses, the graveyard experiments, the way Dexter talks about death as interesting instead of tragic. The more Harry understands killers professionally, the more convinced he is that he's raising one. We get a key visual here. Harry at his desk, a crime scene photo of the strangled woman in his hand. In the background, Dexter crosses the room, framed in the same angle, the same distance. For a second, Harry doesn't see his boy. He sees a future crime scene waiting to be documented. In this video, we're going to keep tracking how moments like this harden Harry's plan. This case doesn't just scare him, it locks in his decision to double down on the code. He's no longer theorizing about Dexter's trajectory in the abstract. He's seen the endgame, breathing, smirking, trying and failing to fake humanity under interrogation. If this suspect is what happens without a code, how thin is the line Harry has drawn for Dexter? Really? And what happens when that line meets real-world consequences instead of Harry's controlled training ground? So Harry walks out of that interrogation room with one brutal realization. The line he's drawn for Dexter is paper thin, and there's someone already walking dangerously close to it without even knowing. Debra. Let's kick things off with the way Harry starts clocking Deb, not as a daughter in a vacuum, but as part of Dexter's trajectory. She's loud, emotional, desperate to impress her cop father. She hangs on Dexter's every word, tagging along, asking about cases, wanting to be in the investigation instead of on the sidelines. Those aren't just cute quirks to Harry anymore. They're risk factors. Because the closer she moves toward police work, the closer she moves into Dexter's orbit, professionally, psychologically, geographically, we see it in those small domestic moments. Debra, maybe 12 or 13, blurts out that Dexter is the perfect son, that he's calm and smart and always knows what to do. She looks at him like he's the model of control. Harry should be proud. Instead, we get that tight jaw, that split-second flicker of panic in his eyes. This isn't just a father hiding a secret. It's a cop watching his innocent kid idolize the very person he's training to kill. From that point, the code starts to change tone. Harry doesn't rewrite the rules, but he adds a new pressure point. To keep this clear, he keeps invoking Debra without saying her name like a threat. Getting caught doesn't just mean prison, he tells Dexter. It means destroying your family. It means Debra's life collapsing under the weight of the investigation, the headlines, the shame. Family must never be collateral damage. You protect them, you don't drag them into your darkness. On the surface, that sounds noble. Underneath, it's darker. Because the focus is not just on the system hurting Debra. Harry is gaming out a more intimate danger. Dexter's world and Debra's world colliding in real time. If she becomes a cop, she could stumble onto his kill room, his blood slides, his bodies. If she gets too close emotionally, she could trigger something Harry can't predict. The code becomes less about abstract victims and more about one specific non-victim, Deb. That's Harry's private line in the sand. Whatever Dexter becomes, however the plan evolves, Debra is off limits. Not just physically, no harm, ever, but emotionally. No manipulation that breaks her, no truth that shatters her, unless there's absolutely no other choice. You don't frame one child as the moral hostage for another, unless you genuinely believe that second child is dangerous. Harry does. He believes it enough to weaponize Debra's safety as Dexter's ultimate leash. And along the way, he builds the one vulnerability Dexter will never be able to logic his way out of. by tying Dexter's restraint to Deborah's survival. Harry creates a pressure point that every future failure, every collapsing plan, will stab directly. The central question becomes chillingly simple. When the code and Deborah finally collide, which one will Dexter betray? We know the series doesn't let that question stay hypothetical for long, and this is where Harry runs into a different kind of wall. Not a legal limit, a psychological one. He's built this entire code on the idea that Dexter will tell him when the pressure gets too high, and then Dexter doesn't. To keep this clear, Harry doesn't just sit back and hope for the best. He manufactures safe openings the way a detective stages an interview room. Late-night drives where the radio is low and the road is empty. Fishing trips where the only witnesses are seagulls and mangroves. Quiet moments in Dexter's room when he sits on the edge of the bed and says the line every parent says, and almost no kid believes, "You can tell me anything." Dexter tests that invitation, but he never actually walks through it. He talks about school, about bullies, about feeling off or different or stressed. He offers surface-level honesty that sounds vulnerable enough to pass, yet strategically avoids the core truth: how much he thinks about killing, how vivid the fantasies are, how often he replays the graveyard, the animals, the blood. The more Harry invites honesty, the more Dexter learns to refine his lies. For Harry, that gap is unbearable. He's a cop. His entire career is built on reading suspects, extracting confessions, knowing when a story doesn't match the evidence. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that skill set because it's the same one he turns on his own son. He can feel the distance between what Dexter says and what Dexter is. And here, the distance isn't a few missing details. It's a canyon. So he tries something else. One night, after another "I'm fine, Dad," Harry breaks his own rule about not leading the witness. Do you ever think about hurting people? It's direct. It's the central question. It's the moment that should crack Dexter open, if confession is possible at all. Dexter's answer is technically true and emotionally empty. Something like, "Only when they deserve it," or "Sometimes I get mad, but I'd never really do it." No specifics, no images, no admission of the ritual planning already happening in his head. We can feel the plan collapsing in real time. Harry's attempt to manage this through conversation, through trust, through the fantasy of a running internal investigation where Dexter reports himself before he acts. And that silence terrifies him. Because if Dexter won't fully open up to the one person who already knows he's dangerous, what chance does anyone else have? How is Harry supposed to gauge escalation, to see when fantasy is tipping into action, if his only window is permanently fogged? The focus is not just on a father disappointed his son won't share feelings. Harry realizes he has no real-time access to the dark passenger's trajectory. So he shifts, away from dialogue and deeper into surveillance. He watches Dexter's comings and goings, tests him with staged scenarios, tightens rules, controls variables. Conversation has failed as a tool of prevention. Now the code becomes a monitoring system. Along the way, Harry understands the horror of what he's actually built. He isn't guiding Dexter through confession and remorse. He's managing a closed system he can only see from the outside, waiting for the moment when whatever is sealed in there finally breaks through. That closed system becomes unbearable once Harry stops theorizing and starts testing Dexter against real violence. It's one thing to see your kid in a graveyard with dead animals. It's another to walk him up to an active homicide and realize he's more composed than half the squad. So let's kick things off with the setup Harry tells himself. This is a teaching moment, a deterrent. He's still on the force. The lights are painting the Miami night red and blue. Radios are crackling, Uniforms are stringing up tape. Harry brings teenage Dexter along under the respectable pretext, you want this life, you need to see what it really looks like. Blood, chaos, consequences. From the second the car door opens, the scene assaults us. Sirens, pulse. A gurney squeaks past. Someone is crying behind a wall of officers. The air smells like exhaust, wet pavement, and something metallic underneath. This is designed to overload a civilian nervous system, especially a kid's. Most teenagers would hang back, flinch at the first glimpse of the body, feel nausea rising before the sheet even moves. Dexter doesn't. He goes still. Not frozen, not dissociated. Focused, his eyes track the blood first, not the face. He watches the spatter on the wall, the pooling near the victim's hand, the drag mark leading away from the main stain. While officers shout, he's quiet. While an empt swears under his breath, Dexter leans in half a step, like he's trying to solve a puzzle. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Dexter not freaking out. It's the particular quality of his attention. He's not bracing against horror. He's running an internal investigation. Where did the first blow land? Why is that cast-off pattern so high? Did the killer wipe the knife on the victim's shirt or their own? This is predatory analysis, wearing a teenager's face. Harry sees it. Outwardly, he plays the cop dad, a light scold about not staring, maybe a joke about you don't need front row seats to this, Dex. Inwardly, he's cataloging. No trembling hands. No change in breathing. No avoidance of the body. Just an almost clinical curiosity that mirrors what he's seen in interrogation rooms with actual killers. Then, Dexter does the thing that removes all doubt. He notices something only a trained investigator should catch. A smear on the doorframe that doesn't match the main pattern. A missing watch tan line on the victim's wrist. A footprint in the blood that faces the wrong direction. He points it out, not to help, but because it bothers him as an incomplete pattern. In this video, we're going to keep returning to these tiny fractures between what Harry planned and what reality delivered. Here, the escalation is obvious. From dissected animals to a human body, from morbid curiosity to professional-level composure. In a place built to shock the horror into people, Harry watches his son feel almost at home. And that's the moment the future stops being a fear and hardens into a trajectory he can no longer deny. In that graveyard, Harry stops being able to lie to himself about Dexter's trajectory. But what's even more unsettling is how, slowly, he stops trying to linguistically separate himself from it. The investigation into his own son's psychology doesn't just change what he plans to do, it changes how he talks. Let's kick things off by rewinding to those early lectures. Young Dexter in the passenger seat, Harry gripping the steering wheel too tight, saying things like, "You can't do this, you have to control yourself, you need to stop." Short sentences. Clear distance. The problem is you, the boy with the urges. The solution is also you, the boy who has to fix it. Harry is the cop, the father, the outside force trying to hold the line. Then the code arrives. Harry starts building a system. Background checks, patterns of violence, a private moral investigation layered over his official police work. And the pronouns begin to slip. We have to be careful. We can't leave evidence. We only go after people who deserve it. It's subtle at first, just a few words. But the shift is massive. The focus is not just on containing Dexter anymore. It's on coordinating with him. To keep this clear, that one syllable, we, marks the real collapse of Harry's moral firewall. He moves from seeing Dexter's darkness as an external threat to treating it as a shared project, a joint operation that demands planning, control, and precision. He's no longer simply warning a dangerous child. He's co-authoring a killer's life. There's a key scene that crystallizes this. Harry walks Dexter through how to dispose of a body, plastic, drainage, currents, the exact timing to avoid patrol patterns. He's in full cop mode. But then he says it, if they find the body, we're finished. The word hangs there. He hears it as he says it. There's a tiny pause, a flicker of self-disgust across his face, as if he's just realized he didn't accidentally step over a line. He's been inching toward it for years. In this video, we're going to keep tracking moments like that, because, for Dexter, hearing "we" from his moral authority figure is everything. It cements the idea that his killing is not just tolerated, not just managed, but co-owned by Harry. If Dad is in this with him, how wrong can it really be? The code stops feeling like a cage and starts feeling like a partnership. And that partnership cuts both ways. The language tightens their bond, but it also deepens Harry's dread. Every time he says "we," he's acknowledging that if Dexter becomes a monster, Harry didn't just fail to stop him, he helped build him. Once a father steps into the "we" of his son's murders, is there any clean way out for either of them? That "we" doesn't just live in Harry's conversations, it starts living in his paperwork. At some point, Harry stops treating Dexter like a troubled kid and starts treating him like an active case. And he does it the way a cop knows best. He opens a file. Picture Harry alone at the kitchen table after Dexter's asleep. Coffee going cold, lamp turned low, a cheap spiral notebook or a manila folder laid open. On the first page, dates, locations, short clinical lines. Found animal remains behind shed. No visible remorse. Graveyard visit. Fascination with bones, not grief. From there, the entries keep coming. Short sentence. Short sentence. Then a longer elaboration that sounds less like a father and more like an investigator building a profile. To keep this clear, Harry is essentially running a shadow investigation on his own son. He tracks behaviors the same way he tracks serial offenders on the job, patterns, escalation, cooling off periods, and stressors. One page might map out the weeks Dexter goes quiet after a stern talk, followed by a spike in secretive behavior when school stress ramps up. Another notes how Dexter reacts in the hospital corridor, staring a little too long at the blood, relaxing in the smell that makes other kids nauseous. This isn't parenting by instinct anymore. This is data collection. Along the way, those notes turn into a chilling timeline. There's an early entry about the first dead animal Dexter brings home, framed as a science experiment. Later, Harry logs the backyard excavation, when he digs up a graveyard of dismembered pets and realizes this isn't a phase. Then the graveyard scene itself. Observe Dexter studying headstones, focusing on dates and causes of death. The hospital corridor. No fear response. Elevated curiosity. The first theoretical human target, Dexter identified bully as deserving. Redirected conversation. Risk increasing. Each line is a step on a trajectory Harry already believes he knows. The focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on how he responds when Harry pushes or pulls on the behavior. Harry tests boundaries like a detective testing a suspect's story. What happens if he shames Dexter? What happens if he normalizes the urge? What happens if he introduces the language of the code? In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern, Harry trying to regain control through procedure, and that plan quietly failing in real time. And there's a brutal ethical weight to that choice. When a father turns his child into a logbook of incidents, he's admitting he no longer trusts love or even proximity to keep people safe. People don't create long-term behavioral logs for passing phases. They do it for chronic, dangerous conditions. Harry's file is his way of staying ahead of Dexter's evolution. trying to predict when the next boundary will be tested or broken. But what does it do to a man to watch the pages stack up and realize the story they tell is getting darker, not better? From a few scribbled notes to a thick, rubber-banded bundle in his desk, that file becomes its own quiet horror. One night, Harry pulls it out, flips through entries that read like a future indictment, and understands the consequences of what he's built. He's not just documenting a problem, he's assembling the case file that could one day be used to put Dexter away. And the more complete it gets, the more he has to ask himself a question we'll confront next. Is he preparing to protect his son or to prosecute him? So when Harry closes that notebook and realizes he's built the future case file on his own son, the next fracture doesn't come from a bloodslide. It comes from a sentence. From the first time Dexter chooses to protect the dark passenger instead of the man who gave it a code. Let's kick things off with a night that, on paper, should have been harmless. No kill room. No plastic. Just teenage Dexter, a car, and too much time alone. Harry thinks Dexter's at the library studying. In reality, Dexter is parked outside a rundown house, watching a drunk neighbor stagger in and out, imagining how easily that body could be wrapped, drained, erased. The man isn't a confirmed killer. He's just loud, mean, and convenient. The fantasy is off code, and Dexter knows it. When he finally comes home, Harry is waiting. We feel the investigation before Harry asks a single question. The time on the clock. The keys in Dexter's hand. The faint smell of stale beer from the bar Dexter parked behind. Harry opens with something simple. Where were you? Dexter's answer is small, almost boring. He says he stayed late at the library, then drove to a diner to clear his head. It's plausible. It's tidy. And that's exactly why it's suspicious. The lie isn't built to avoid a lecture about curfew. It's engineered to hide proximity to potential violence. No mention of which diner. No receipt. No detail about what he ate, who he saw, how long he was there. Just a rehearsed arc designed to move Harry past the question and back to the illusion of control. Harry has heard 1,000 alibis. As a seasoned detective, he lives in the space between what people say and what actually happened. He clocks the timing immediately. The drive from the library doesn't match the gap on the clock. The missing specifics ring louder than any confession. And Dexter's tone? Too even. Too prepared. This isn't a teenager scrambling. It's a predator protecting hunting ground. To keep this clear, the central question for Harry isn't, is Dexter lying? It's who is he lying for? If Dexter were just afraid of punishment, the lie would bend toward Harry's rules. Instead, it bends around them. The focus is not just on the content of the story, but on its purpose. Dexter is carving out unregulated space for the dark passenger to roam, even if that means sidelining the very code Harry sold as salvation. Along the way, Harry feels something colder than anger. He realizes the thing he's been trying to domesticate now has its own agenda. Dexter is no longer a reluctant student. He's an operator, running a parallel plan Harry doesn't get to supervise. Once Dexter starts hiding his inner life from the one person who knows his secret, Harry can't pretend this is a phase he's guiding. It's a trajectory he's losing. And that raises the next, darker question. If Dexter is willing to lie this smoothly when there's no body, what happens the first time that same calm, practiced voice is covering fresh blood on his hands? That question doesn't stay hypothetical for long. We move from Dexter lying about urges to Dexter being physically unable to function without acting on them. Let's kick things off with a stretch of forced peace. Harry slows everything down. No late-night drives. No practice hunts. He leans on the code as a break, insisting there just aren't any targets who meet their standards. Maybe there's increased police presence. maybe the investigation climate is too hot. On the surface, it's a responsible plan. Delay the kill until it's safe. Prove Dexter can maintain control. Dexter does not maintain control. At first, it's subtle. He's restless at the dinner table. His eyes drift to the TV whenever a violent crime story flashes across the screen. He rewinds the news, not for the facts, but for the blood spatter. Then it escalates. He snaps at Harry over nothing. His schoolwork tanks. He starts staying up late, scrolling crime scene photos Harry left out, tracing the outlines of bodies like he's memorizing them. The longer the abstinence, the more his psychology frays. To keep this clear, Harry doesn't just watch. He tests. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this pattern. Harry thinks he's designing structure, but he's actually running experiments on his own son. He pushes sports. Dexter goes through the motions, but there's no catharsis. He pushes work, ride-alongs, more time at actual crime scenes. Dexter is fascinated, but the agitation doesn't drop. Harry even doubles down on code discussions, turning them into intense, almost philosophical debates about justice. Instead of soothing Dexter, it sharpens the hunger. The central question for Harry becomes brutal. Is Dexter attached to the code, or just using it as a hallway to get to the kill? He gets his answer the moment a sanctioned target finally appears. A repeat offender slips through the legal system. Harry greenlights it. On that first fully authorized kill, Dexter's entire demeanor changes. The tension drains out of his body. His voice is lighter. He sleeps. For the first time in weeks, he looks calm. Harry realizes what we're seeing. The code is just the gate. The kill is the release. The relief is almost euphoric, like a drug hitting the bloodstream. And that's where the real dread sets in. Because if killing functions as a baseline requirement for Dexter's stability, then the hierarchy is terrifyingly clear. The code is flexible, negotiable, something Harry can tweak. The urge is non-negotiable. Along the way, Harry understands the consequences of that hierarchy. Total abstinence isn't a cure, it's a pressure cooker. So he makes the most damning decision of his life. He keeps providing code-approved outlets, not to prevent murder, but to schedule it. He's not stopping a killer from emerging. He's making sure the monster doesn't explode all at once. But that schedule only works if Harry can pretend he's outside of it, above it. The cop managing the monster. And then there's the night he realizes the monster speaks his language because it learned it from him. Picture a late arrest that falls apart on a technicality. Harry spent weeks on the investigation, only to watch a slick defense attorney walk a child killer out of the station. The camera of our memory lingers on Harry's jaw, the way it locks as the suspect smirks. Harry mutters, "Scum like that always walks." The system's a joke. It's not a plan. It's a leak, a moment of raw, vengeful satisfaction at the thought of something bad happening to this man. And Dexter is there. Teenager, quiet, watching. We see him clock the rage, the contempt, the almost physical pleasure Harry takes in imagining consequences outside the courtroom. Dexter doesn't flinch from it. He mirrors it. The same hard eyes. The same tiny, satisfied exhale when the suspect brushes past them and Harry whispers under his breath, "One day, someone's going to take care of you." This is the moment Harry catches his own reflection in Dexter's darkness. In those calm, unblinking eyes, he recognizes the desire he's been nursing for years, to see justice done when the law fails, to bend rules, because the alternative feels like moral collapse. Only in Dexter, that impulse isn't a fantasy or a bitter joke. It's a lethal instinct searching for a framework. To keep this clear, the central question for Harry isn't just, is Dexter dangerous? Anymore, it's how much of that danger sounds like me. He has spent a career drawing a bright line between cop and criminal. Badge versus perp. Investigation versus impulse. Now he sees that line trembling inside his own house, in his own adopted son, and he feels how thin it has always been in him. We get a key exchange that crystallizes it. Later, after another case collapses, Harry repeats the same old refrain about the system failing. This time, Dexter answers, almost casually. That's why people like him have to be taken care of. If the code can't do it, someone else should. It's Harry's language, rearranged into a death sentence. His cynicism upgraded into a mission statement. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these echoes, because the focus is not just on Dexter's psychology, but on the feedback loop between father and son. Harry suddenly understands that his war stories, his late-night rants about scum, his offhand fantasies about what he'd do if he weren't a cop, have given Dexter moral vocabulary for urges Harry once hoped were purely neurological. Along the way, those stories became a codebook, and that recognition doesn't make him step back. It makes him double down. If Harry knows how seductive that dark logic feels inside his own head, how irresistible will it be to someone who doesn't feel guilt the same way? So he tightens the rules, refines the code, drills Dexter harder on procedure and control. Convinced that the only way to prevent total failure is to micromanage the trajectory of every kill. Each major section will show Harry trying to stay ahead of a future he already sees. Because at this point, Harry doesn't just know Dexter will become a killer because of who Dexter is. He knows it because of what he's already poured into him, drop by bitter drop. Until the reflection looking back at him is carrying a knife, and eventually Harry stops pretending the knife in that reflection is hypothetical. We're in that cramped teenage bedroom, the air thick with formaldehyde and secrets. The shoebox graves in the backyard have already been dug up. The animal cruelty is no longer a phase. The graveyard visit and the hospital corridor talk have already failed to scare Dexter straight. This is not another warning. This is sentencing. Harry sits on the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped, tie loosened. He doesn't pace. He doesn't yell. He looks at Dexter the way a veteran cop looks at a crime scene he's seen too many times. Weary, resigned, almost clinical. When he finally speaks, he doesn't say urges or dark thoughts. He says, very plainly, "You're going to kill someone. Dexter, that line matters." The focus is not just on a worried parent predicting trouble. It's a decorated detective delivering a conclusion at the end of a private investigation he's been running on his own son. Not you might. Not if we're not careful. You will kill. And then he follows it with the second half of the plan. If you're going to do this, we have to make sure you only kill the right people. The code, finally named as what it really is, logistics for future homicide. To keep this clear, everything before this moment was still deniable. The empathy tests in the car, the crime scene field trips, the rehearsals about not getting caught, all of that could be framed as a cop dad overreacting to a damaged kid. Here, that collapses. Harry is no longer trying to prevent a killer. He's acknowledging one and choosing to help him operate. And Dexter's reaction? It's not horror. It's not even surprise. His face barely moves, but his eyes do. There's a flicker of relief. That's sharp. Unsettling validation when the thing you were afraid to say about yourself gets spoken by the one moral authority you trust. If Harry, the man who built Dexter's entire sense of right and wrong, says killing is inevitable as long as it follows rules, then Dexter's not a monster. He's a project. Harry's body language seals it. No fire and brimstone father, no dramatic ultimatum. He talks like a doctor explaining a chronic condition. This is what you are. This is how we manage it. These are the consequences if you lose control. From the buried dogs to the blood in the shipping container, from the graveyard to the hospital corridor, every data point converges into one sentence that rewires Dexter's psychology. In this video, we're going to keep tracking how that sentence becomes Dexter's entire self-concept, a controlled predator with a sanctioned mission. Because once Harry says it out loud, the trajectory changes. There's no going back for Harry, no going back for Dexter, and no way for anyone who wanders into their orbit to stay untouched. The central question now isn't will Dexter kill? It's much worse. What happens to everyone else once father and son agree that he must? For adult Dexter, that agreement lands like a post-mortem report on his own childhood. Suddenly, Harry's lessons don't look like a desperate parent trying to prevent a tragedy. They look like a meticulous plan to manage a bomb Harry was convinced would detonate no matter what. We watch Dexter do what he does best: reconstruct the scene. Not a crime scene this time, but a childhood. The backyard full of shallow animal graves he once filed under experimentation. Now it reads like Exhibit A. Harry standing there with a flashlight, staring at the tiny corpses, doesn't look shocked anymore in Dexter's memory. He looks resigned. As if the investigation is over and the diagnosis is in, this is not a phase. This is a predator in progress. To keep this clear, we can track how Dexter's internal narration starts treating Harry's choices like evidence. Those late-night drives that used to feel like father-son bonding, cruising empty streets while Harry quizzes him about urges and control. Reframed, they're controlled tests. Stress drills. Harry isn't asking whether Dexter might kill. He's building the framework for when he inevitably does. The first time Harry explains the code, it no longer plays as a hopeful boundary. It's a set of operating procedures for a future serial killer. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that shift in psychology. Because once Dexter understands that Harry never believed in a cure, every lesson curdles. The blood slides Harry teaches him to value as trophies of justice become a tracking system, a way to catalog the bomb's blast radius. The crime scenes Harry walks him through, calmly separating good kills from bad, stop being moral debates, and start looking like rehearsals. Was there ever a version of Dexter, he wonders, where Harry imagined him not killing at all? This is where the paradox locks in. Harry's love and Harry's fear are the same force pressing in on Dexter's identity. By preparing him to kill safely, Harry confirms that killing is Dexter's core function. You don't design a detailed code for something you think might go away. You design it for something permanent, something you've already accepted as fact. How is Dexter supposed to imagine a different self when the one person he trusts most has engineered his entire life around the assumption that he will spill blood, and Dexter feels that trap? The central question of his inner monologue stops being "what am I?" and becomes "what else could I possibly be?" Every contingency Harry built, the victim vetting, the careful disposal, the absolute secrecy, doubles as a message. This is who you are, and the only question is whether you do it correctly. Each major section of his past, from the animals to the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, snaps into place as one continuous trajectory. Along the way, a darker realization surfaces. Maybe Harry didn't just predict the darkness. Maybe his certainty poured concrete around it. If the code was never a treatment, only a containment strategy, then the real collapse is still coming. What happens when Dexter starts to question the one plan that has always defined him? So let's kick things off by looking at the code not as wisdom from a worried father, but as firmware. From the moment Harry sits teenage Dexter down and lays out the rules, he isn't really giving him ethics. He's loading a program. Don't get caught. Only kill the guilty. Be sure of the evidence. On paper, that sounds like a moral framework. In practice, it reads like operating instructions for a weapon. stalk the target, confirm the crimes, erase the scene, leave no trace. The focus is not just on what Dexter should believe, but on how he should behave, step by step, every time the urge appears. That's not philosophy. That's behavioral conditioning. To keep this clear, think about when Harry catches Dexter in the graveyard, digging up the buried animal corpses. Harry doesn't say, "You have to stop." He says, in effect, "You can't do this here. You'll get caught." The problem isn't the cruelty. The problem is the exposure. From that point forward, every lesson is about control of the plan, not transformation of the person. And when those rules are repeated from adolescence, they do more than guide Dexter's actions, they hardwire his self-concept. He's not a teenager wrestling with impulses that might be understood, treated, or even outgrown. He's a thing, a tool with a single designated function. Harry's language is all about channeling and controlling the darkness. But what Dexter actually hears is devastatingly simple. The darkness is permanent, inevitable, and central to who you are. You will kill. Our only question is how cleanly. What does that do to a mind already fractured by trauma? It closes the exits. If your father, a decorated cop who rescued you from a shipping container of blood, tells you that your urges are ineradicable but manageable, he quietly removes the possibility of real change while dangling a different prize: perfection in violence. The code becomes a game of flawless execution. No witnesses, no fibers, no prints. The investigation is the enemy. Technical mastery is salvation. We see this most clearly when Harry drills Dexter on crime scene cleanup, walking him through bleach, disposal, trace evidence. Like a mentor, training a prodigy. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that dynamic. Harry thinks he's building a safeguard, but he's really building a specialist. Dexter learns to be a better predator, not a better human. Competence, not conscience, is what gets praised. Along the way, the central question of Dexter's life quietly shifts. It's no longer, should I be doing this? It becomes, am I doing this correctly? Every successful kill feels like proof that Harry was right about him. Every operational failure feels like a betrayal of the code, not a warning about the entire trajectory. Which brings us back to our thesis. Harry didn't just know Dexter would become a killer by turning his son's inner world into a checklist. He ensured Dexter would never seriously attempt to become anything else. The next collapse comes when that programming meets something the code never accounted for: people Dexter might actually love. Harry wanted to save other people from Dexter. The cost was that he quietly stopped trying to save Dexter from himself. From the moment young Dexter hears, in that car, that he has these urges and they will never go away, Harry's language becomes the scaffolding of Dexter's inner voice. Monster, passenger, thing. Dexter doesn't start by saying, "I don't feel anything." He starts by hearing his father explain that lack as a permanent defect, a problem to be managed with a plan. Over time, that plan hardens into identity. If the person who rescued you from a blood-soaked shipping container defines you as a future killer, how long before you stop even imagining you could be anything else? To keep this clear, listen to Dexter's narration across the seasons. I don't get to have feelings. I'm an empty shell. The dark passenger made me do it. These are not neutral descriptions. They're legal arguments he's learned to make on his own mind, echoing Harry's original investigation into his son: observe the behavior, label the pathology, design the code. The focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on how he talks about himself as evidence, rather than as a person. That self-indictment infects every relationship. With Rita, Dexter tells himself she's a perfect cover because she's damaged and won't expect real intimacy. When he starts to actually care, he treats that care like a glitch in the system, not a signal that Harry's diagnosis might be incomplete. With Deborah, the tragedy is even sharper. She loves him unconditionally, but Dexter filters that love through the belief that he is fundamentally wrong inside, a belief Harry's training carved into him. So when Deb starts to see the truth, Dexter doesn't ask, "Can I change?" He asks, "Can she survive what I am?" By the time Harrison arrives, the trajectory is locked. Dexter holds his son and immediately fears genetic contamination, as if Harry's certainty about him has become a hereditary curse. Instead of seeing fatherhood as a path out, he treats it as a new variable in the same lethal equation. And here's the tragic irony. Harry's acceptance of Dexter's darkness was supposed to be compassionate. Don't deny it. Don't let it spiral into random slaughter. Yet, in accepting it as unchangeable, Harry kills something else. Dexter's belief that he could ever be fully human. If your earliest therapy is a cop walking you through crime scenes to calibrate your urges, you learn that your heart is a threat vector, not a compass. So, Dexter learns emotional detachment as a survival skill. Harry logs his reactions like a case file. Young Dexter watches his own face in bathroom mirrors, practicing normal. If your father treats your feelings as data points in a risk assessment, you will treat every flicker of empathy with suspicion. Is this real, or just another variable that could make the plan fail? That's why, what would Harry think? Becomes less a moral question and more a parole officer's voice in his head. It's not what is right. It's, what would the man who assumed I would always be dangerous allow me to do? Every time Dexter reaches for connection, Rita's family dinners, Deb's trust, Harrison's hero worship, Harry's ghost is there, reminding him that the code comes first, because the killer comes first. The real damage, then, isn't just the bodies Dexter leaves behind, it's the prison of certainty he lives in. Even when he imagines escape, running away with Lumen, disappearing after Rita's death, vanishing into Iron Lake, he's still moving inside Harry's original frame. A predator trying to pick the least harmful hunting ground. The next section will track how, once that frame finally cracks, Dexter doesn't become free. He becomes exposed to everyone he's ever tried to protect. Once that frame cracks, we have to rewind the tape and ask the central question. How did Harry ever get to a place where teaching his son to kill felt like the responsible option? That isn't a leap you make off one bad report card. It's a conclusion built from scenes he could not unsee, stacking until there was no other narrative that made sense. Let's kick things off in the backyard. Fresh-turned earth. Small, uneven mounds. A teenage Dexter with a shovel, and that calm, distant look we learn to recognize. Harry doesn't just find a dead animal. He finds a system. Multiple graves. Carefully dug, carefully covered. From a cop's perspective, this isn't a kid who stumbled on a corpse. This is someone running a private investigation into death, one body at a time. To keep this clear, Harry isn't just clocking cruelty. He's clocking organization, ritual, escalation, the way Dexter catalogs the wounds, the way he talks about them as specimens, not pets. In that moment, Harry sees the first full rehearsal of the plan Dexter will one day use on people. Isolate, kill, bury, return to the scene. It's not fantasy anymore. It's practice. Then we jump to the graveyard. Disturbed soil. Bones in Dexter's hands. No panic, no guilt. Just a quiet, clinical curiosity as he explains what he's doing. Harry looks around and realizes this isn't a phase he can ground his son out of. It's a pattern with a trajectory, and that trajectory leads straight past animals to human victims. How many kids go to a cemetery to feel closer to the dead things they've buried at home? So, Harry starts testing. He talks about crime scenes, about victims, about families left behind. He waits for spontaneous feeling, and instead gets rehearsed concern, like Dexter has learned the right lines, but not the emotion underneath. Or, worse, he gets blank questions. How long did they scream? How much blood was there? The focus is not just on what Dexter says, but on what's missing. No instinctive horror, no intuitive empathy, just data collection. And then comes the hunt. Harry watches Dexter stalk animals, not because he has to, but because he wants to. The way Dexter's body lights up when he's closing in, the way the relief after the kill is actually overshadowed by the thrill before it. This is crucial for Harry's psychology. He isn't just seeing compulsion, he's seeing pleasure. How do you unteach pleasure? Even after the code is drafted, Harry catches Dexter fantasizing past the rules, imagining kills that don't fit the file, thinking about shortcuts, about what he could do if he didn't have to check every box. That's the quiet failure of the code already visible in Dexter's mind. The safety rails are being shaken, tested for weak spots. From Harry's vantage point, these aren't isolated red flags. They're a runway of flares, all pointing in one direction. Backyard graves, graveyard rituals, failed empathy, the joy of the hunt, private fantasies that edge past the limits he's tried to impose. With or without guidance, Dexter will kill. The only question, for Harry, becomes terrifyingly narrow. Does he try to steer that inevitability, or try to stop it and risk a different, public kind of collapse? The next section will follow how that choice, once made, locks both of them into a plan neither can really control. Harry makes his choice in that moment, and this is where the real nightmare begins. Not with Dexter's first kill, but with a father deciding that the best plan is not to stop the monster, but to refine it. To keep this clear, we can start with the argument Harry would probably make to himself. He's a seasoned cop. He's seen crime scenes that never leave his head. He knows what happens when someone like Dexter grows up without any structure, escalation, experimentation, victims chosen at random, an investigation that only kicks in after the damage is irreversible. In that calculus, the code looks like harm reduction. If Dexter must kill, then at least make him meticulous. Verify guilt. Follow evidence. Avoid innocence. From Harry's perspective, the alternative isn't a normal son. It's a sloppier, louder, more chaotic butcher. And there is a brutal logic there. A teenage Dexter killing animals in the yard is one thing. An adult Dexter with no rules, no training, and no sense of consequences is another. The code promises control. A framework. A way to keep the body count confined to people who, in Harry's mind, deserve it. That's the utilitarian dream. Channel evil so it cancels other evil out. But once we sit with that, the darker side becomes impossible to ignore. Because Harry doesn't just put guardrails on Dexter's darkness, he upgrades it. He teaches his son how investigations work, how forensics can both reveal and erase, how patterns are detected, and how to bury them. He walks Dexter through crime scenes and essentially says, here's how killers get caught, here's how you won't. The focus is not just on who Dexter targets, but on how efficiently he can operate without exposure. In other words, the code doesn't dilute the monster, it optimizes it. It takes a traumatized child with violent impulses and turns him into a precision predator, one who understands police procedure better than the people chasing him. Is that protection or manufacture? The uncomfortable answer is that both can be true. Harry may genuinely save some innocent lives. Dexter's table is filled with rapists, murderers, and predators who would have kept going. At the same time, Harry is doing something morally catastrophic to his own son, accepting his future as a killer as fixed, and then engineering that violence into a long-term lifestyle. He's not curing anything. He's building a system around the failure to cure. That leads us straight into the central question this section can't resolve for us. Is it ever ethical to look at a child and decide, you will kill, so I will help you do it right? Does the intention to aim that violence at deserving targets actually matter? Or is that just a story we tell so we can sleep at night? And here's where we have to implicate ourselves. In this video, we're going to keep circling back to the fact that we enjoy watching Dexter, precisely because he kills the people we're already primed to hate. We do with our entertainment what Harry does with his code. We tolerate the monster when the victims fit our criteria. Along the way, that paradox becomes the engine of the entire series. Harry knows Dexter will kill, and from that point on, nothing he does is pure redemption. It's damage control. Every lesson, every rule, every whispered justification is an attempt to manage a catastrophe he believes is inevitable. The next section will track how that managed monster keeps slipping the leash, and how Harry's careful framework collapses the moment Dexter tries to live by it on his own. And once we see it as damage control, the whole story shifts. We're no longer just watching a clever cop teach his broken son how to survive. We're watching what happens when one definitive verdict about a child's nature becomes the operating system for his entire life. Zoom out from Miami, from blood slides lined up like trophies, from plastic-wrapped kill rooms humming under fluorescent light. What Harry really builds is not just a code. It's a narrative. You are unchangeable. You are dangerous. And the best we can do is aim you. That's the central question, humming under every investigation, every season, every plan Dexter makes to stay in control. Is he following an inner truth, or a story someone else wrote for him? Harry knew Dexter would become a killer because he saw the signs and decided they were destiny. The shipping container, the flat affect, the dead animals buried in the yard. From there, every choice flows like a straight line. Take him to crime scenes. Normalize the idea that some people deserve to die. Refine the rules until killing feels like a responsible outlet instead of a catastrophic failure of parenting. The tragedy is not just that Harry believed it. The tragedy is that Dexter believed him. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on one father and one son. It's on what happens whenever a label hardens into a sentence. Lost cause. Problem kid. Monster. In schools, in families, in courtrooms, we see the same psychology play out. Call someone irredeemable long enough, and the label becomes a script. People start to perform the role they've been assigned, especially if the authority in their life keeps handing them lines. Dexter's entire trajectory becomes less of an answer and more of a question. Was there ever a version of this story where the boy from the shipping container didn't become what Harry feared? If Harry had pushed for treatment instead of training, if he had called the darkness a wound instead of a destiny, do we get a different man? Or does the same pattern emerge anyway? We never find out, because naming the monster is the moment the cage snaps shut. In this video, we're going to leave Harry and Dexter right there, at that terrible intersection of intention and outcome. But if we keep following the code into the real world, each major section will show us the same pattern, plans built on certainty, collapsing the second other people enter the frame. If you want to keep pulling at that thread, the next stop is every single time Dexter's plan completely fell apart, where we dissect every catastrophic miscalculation that spills out of this original design. Picture one last image, Harry driving at night, young Dexter in the passenger seat, the rearview mirror catching both of their eyes. Two faces, one story. A savior, an accomplice, or something in between. Decide where you land, then click through, and let's see how far this story really falls.